I've been playing Fallout games for a long time. Fallout 3 came out half my lifetime ago, and I've been a fan ever since. But the one thing you learn quickly as someone who delves into the modern Fallout experiences is that these games, the ones under the umbrella of Bethesda, are night and day in comparison to what is offered with the original post-nuclear role-playing game and its sequel. Where Fallout 3, New Vegas, and 4 are all first-person shooter RPGs, Fallout 1 and 2 fall into the CRPG genre, a tactics-based game with a trimetric presentation where you overlook your character and move them around the map at the click of your mouse. All that you may expect from the modern Fallout games is there. You can explore the world, help out settlements, converse with talking heads, and use your character's stats to get your way either through stealth, diplomacy, or combat. However, exploration is tied to an overworld map where you watch your character move along it. Talking heads are few and far between, stealth is much more arcane in nature, and combat has no real-time aspects involved, instead focusing on per-turn strategy making and decisions. At a glance, the games couldn't look any more different from one another, but within their mechanics, there are more similarities than you may initially realize. This was something I learned back when I finally played Fallout 1 for the first time, and later Fallout 2 following that. I already had an affinity for CRPGs by this point in my life, something that I didn't start with growing up, and so I was much more eager to see what this game was all about, despite how daunting it initially seemed to me. A timed experience where you could find yourself soft-locked from being able to complete it, and the very real idea that this game was going to be such a learning experience through and through often turned me away from wanting to trudge through it. It wasn't that I didn't want to give the game a chance, it just sounded so stressful to me at the time and I didn't have it in me in the moment. While Fallout definitely is a learning experience and requires some adjusting to get used to, hilariously, it's one of the easiest CRPGs I've ever played. The balancing feels skewed incredibly in the player's favor, and there's little features that you could look at as either intentional or an oversight, which make it possible to just steamroll through everything whether you mean to or not. On the surface, Fallout can look like a game that may be difficult to get into, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Rather, the hardest part for me at the time was getting it to run at a proper resolution on modern hardware, something that has gotten easier over the years. It's such an iconic experience to this day. Players criticize Bethesda and the modern releases for not being like the originals. Either through mechanics, lore changes, or both, many loved the original game so much that they look at the modern releases as ruining the series. While it can be hard to relate to that, it's understandable why it is. It single-handedly revived CRPGs in the mid-90s, being one of the first games to center itself around the concept of making choices that mattered. Not the first of its kind, but definitely one of the most thorough. And it would have rippling effects throughout the entire gaming market, even to the present day. Morality, choice, and consequence within our games have become ingrained in what we expect to see within most Western RPGs, especially during the early 2000s. It's a game full of staples that other games would not only mimic but make the norm moving forward. Revolutionary feels like too weak of a word, too little a description for what Fallout has positively done for generations of games to come. So today I want to dive deep into the initial game of the series, the progenitor that started it all for some. I'm SuperRad, and this is the Big Fallout, a post-nuclear role-playing game retrospective.
War. War never changes. The Romans waged war to gather slaves and wealth. Spain built an empire from its lust for gold and territory. Hitler shaped a battered Germany into an economic superpower. But war never changes. In the 21st century, war was still waged over the resources that could be acquired. Only this time, the spoils of war were also its weapons. Petroleum and uranium. For these resources, China would invade Alaska, the US would annex Canada, and the European Commonwealth would dissolve into quarreling, bickering nation-states bent on controlling the last remaining resources on Earth. In 2077, the storm of World War had come again. In 2 brief hours, most of the planet was reduced to cinders. And from the ashes of nuclear devastation, a new civilization would struggle to arise. A few were able to reach the relative safety of the large underground vaults. Your family was part of that group that entered Vault 13. Imprisoned safely behind the large vault door, under a mountain of stone, a generation has lived without knowledge of the outside world. Life in the vault is about to change.
There's a lot to go over in regards to the history of Fallout. In fact, there's countless history articles, interviews, and talks given by individuals within the original dev team that this section of the video could potentially end up longer than the rest of it. 2 of the best areas you can get historical recountings of Fallout's development are through a GDC talk with Tim Kaine from 2012, as well as a series called The Origins of Fallout, written by Scott Campbell, who was the lead designer for the game, leaving Interplay before the game was finally released in October of 1997. I'll leave a collection of sources, including these 2, in the description. Beginning development in early 1994, Fallout would start as a personal project at Interplay for Tim Kaine. Both Tim and Scott Campbell were fans of the pen and paper role-playing game known as GURPS, which stands for the Generic Universal Role-Playing System. Created by Steve Jackson and owned by Steve Jackson Games, both Tim and Scott worked on their own GURPS-related software in their free time, with Tim developing a character creator he showed off to Scott, and Scott developing a vehicle creator for the same pen and paper system. Both would vocalize a desire to work on a digital GURPS RPG, but it would be Tim who finally pitched it to Interplay, where they both worked at the time. Created within Tim's own engine, simply because he wanted to, he sold the idea of the game to Interplay by showcasing the modularity of GURPS as a system. If you don't know, the universal role-playing game is just that, a system designed to let you add anything to it from any type of fiction you desire, while still holding onto the core rules that act as its base. Steve Jackson Games would release countless books that helped make this possible, and you could add or remove any setting and rules to your heart's content. The appeal here for Tim when discussing it with Interplay was that owning the license of GURPS and creating the system base would allow the system to be reused in future games developed by the studio, offering creative control over aspects of the game, as well as royalties, the real reason Steve Jackson Games seemed to respond. The project was greenlit, but seemingly as an unofficial one that Tim would have to work on his own due to other projects keeping people busy. In fact, Tim seemed to not be allowed to talk to other developers while they were working, as producers didn't want him taking hands away from their own projects. To bypass this hurdle, Tim would often host pizza parties after hours and send an email out to anyone interested in talking about what would come to be Fallout. 6 months of working alone with no budget eventually turned into Tim having 2 new additions to the team, which he described as a scripter and an artist. Within the second year, 15 people would be brought onto the team, including Scott Campbell as the lead designer. Within the third year, they had 30 people total, and many long hours of development off the clock that would later turn into severe crunch. And I mean severe. Never leaving the office-style crunch with 12 to 14-hour days. Tim seems to look fondly on those times, as many of these individuals were in their 20s and voluntarily doing a large portion of this, but at least acknowledges that he wouldn't be able to do that now. The games went through several ideas before settling on the post-apocalypse. Some examples Scott mentions include an alien invasion, watership down but with guns, and radioactive zombies, which is, that's pretty close to what we got, or at least an aspect of it. Another example includes a time travel adventure that was canned early on due to the amount of art necessary being unfeasible, as well as several other complications. Eventually, the team settled on the post-apocalypse. With this, the team decided on creating a sequel to 1998's Wasteland. Well, Tim called it a sequel to Wasteland, but Scott claims it was a remake of the original, which would be titled GURPS Wasteland. So take that as you will. Unfortunately, Interplay's legal team informed them, while already working on the project, that the license of the game was still owned by EA, and only because the license was recently reacquired by the company. As Scott puts it, EA had let the Wasteland license die since it was 7 years since the product had been released. However, because Interplay had released Wasteland as part of Interplay's 10th anniversary collection and had given EA money for the right, it was as if EA republished the game, thus securing the Wasteland license for EA for another 7 years. The team was informed of this right before Christmas break, and this wouldn't be the last of their licensing issues either. Despite the setback with Wasteland, everyone felt very connected and invested in the post-apocalyptic setting. Deciding to stick with it, the beginning of Vault 13, a GURPS post-nuclear adventure, was born. The title, Vault 13, was criticized for not offering enough insight into what the game was, and it would be Brian Fargo, the founder of Interplay, who would suggest the name Fallout, which they then ran with. This name change happened 4 to 5 months before the game shipped. Influences for the product included games, movies, and books. A sci-fi novel titled A Canticle for Leibowitz was the inspiration for the Brotherhood of Steel due to its focus on the worshipping of technology. Games like XCOM would influence combat, while Ultima would influence various role-playing aspects and features. Wasteland, of course, influenced the setting as well. Movies like Mad Max 2, also known as The Road Warrior, were big for setting the tone and references throughout the game. You can require the jacket and gun of Max Rockatansky, I think, as well as find the first iteration of Dogmeat in Junktown. Tim mentions how the film A Boy and His Dog had the vaults they would implement into the game, but Scott Campbell recounts a story about how Tim claimed they came to him in a dream. It was Tim explaining the dream that led to Scott writing down countless ideas for the game due to the inspiration. Other movies like City of the Lost Children and La Jetée heavily influenced the aesthetic. Fallout would have several issues during development. One Tim has brought up includes the game being difficult to convey to people, and it didn't sound fun by any description. They often had to get people to play the game to understand it, and this was one of the times the game was almost cancelled due to it being considered too nebulous in Tim's words. Another cancellation would happen seemingly early in development when Interplay acquired the license to Forgotten Realms and Planescape in 1994. Marketing didn't want to lose sales on these licensed products due to seeing Fallout as potential competition, and they considered it a B product where they wanted to move the manpower back to real work. Tim claims he had to beg Brian Fargo to allow it to keep going. Marketing seemed to be a thorn in Tim's side for many reasons. Due to the success of Diablo, they wanted to change Fallout into a real-time isometric game, and that had to be actively fought against. While the game is generally considered by audiences to be isometric, this isn't the case. Tim even corrects this in his GDC talk, where he mentions how it's cavalier oblique or trimetric. The decision was due to how it allowed the pattern of the game's hexagonal grid to line up, allowing for better calculations from mouse clicks to hex faces, as well as greater distance calculations. However, this hexagonal format had the issue of movement up and down on the screen, having to be completed by a character moving from sides of one hex to another over and over again. In the grand scheme of things, this is hardly an issue, which Tim seems to acknowledge looking back, but it was somewhat of a worry at the time. During development, Fallout seemed to have 2 major rules. Number 1 was multiple decisions per quest objective. Generally, the team wanted to break every major quest into the player being able to shoot, talk, or stealth their way to success. But Tim admits he offered more leeway on the requirements for side quests. Number 2 was no useless skills. This is a bit of a funny one. Originally, skills would be improved through use, which is not the case in the final product. Moreover, many skills feel effectively useless outside of a freedom or role-playing sense. There is very little reason to sneak or steal within Fallout, at least in my opinion, and you will probably never see yourself using outdoorsman or even more prominent skills like first aid and doctor. Despite the rule, Fallout had many aspects about it that one may consider effectively useless outside of a desire to make your own fun and test what was possible. The game was meant to be dark and serious, but humor tended to shine through. more dark than slapstick, mind you, but still there. It is Leonard Boyarsky who is credited as keeping the entire aesthetic of the game consistent, but he was also a voice of reason somewhat. Watching what you could do to kids in the game, Leonard questioned if leaving it in was the right call, but Scott stuck to his guns, and being able to kill them stayed within the final product. This is due to Fallout being a game not about morality, but of consequence. Want to blow up a town, kids included? Sure, but the minute you are the reason for one death of a minor, virtually nobody in the game is going to want to talk to you anymore. So if that's something you would want to explore, you have the freedom, but it isn't glorified. In fact, you are actively punished by society for doing so. However, this inclusion did have to be removed in the European release. In fact, all instances of children were removed entirely from what I understand. Surprisingly, these inclusions did not cause them many issues at all aside from some licensing issues with Steve Jackson Games, which we will talk about soon. Even the crass language seemed to be fine, despite Scott pointing out that words like ass were still banned by the FCC on the airwaves. Games have always had development issues, and Fallout was no different. If you visit the Modifius Discord, a channel for the publisher of several tabletop role-playing games, including Fallout, you can find statements by Jesse Heinig. Jesse was a designer and programmer on the original Fallout. Within the Discord, he has provided several messages full of insight on development of the original game and the setting. One thing mentioned is how the design documents for Fallout were incomplete even into final production, and this led to some issues that couldn't be fixed the way they wanted to. As Jesse explains, I discovered a specific way that you could get into a state where Gizmo had no entry dialogue if you approached him at a certain point in the quest sequence. We had to punt that by making him use float text because there was no time left on the schedule to record and animate additional lines. Could you imagine Bethesda saying that? Could you imagine the 8-hour hit pieces that would exist if Bethesda said that? Additionally, things like cultural references or just references to the developers themselves are prevalent throughout the game, which Tim was fine with. However, he had a rule as to not date the content. If someone didn't know about or understand the reference, they shouldn't feel like it is a reference at all. Dogmeat being a reference to Mad Max wouldn't be obvious to anyone who didn't know about the movie, as an example. A game ahead of its time, even features that didn't make it into the final product would later be used heavily by many other releases. Scott's desire to implement a system where every NPC had schedules they would follow was considered too grand to make it into the final release, but he would later feel vindicated when he saw the role-playing game Fable doing just that. GURPS is a skill-based game rather than class-based. Your character is defined by what you invest in them and not necessarily a starting template like warrior or rogue. Tim wanted this same aspect to be used in Fallout as well, but you may be thinking, how is GURPS related to Fallout when they use their own special system instead? Well, the short answer is that the license was dropped. Tim and Chris Taylor, the new lead designer after Scott's departure, were given 2 weeks to redesign the entire system, else the game would be canned. Despite such a short amount of time, they were able to do this and the special system was born, something they all considered for the better due to the freedom it allowed them to have over the IP that they were sorely lacking previously. Well, the long answer is that if you do an initial search online to try and figure out what happened to GURPS and Interplay, you will generally find stories of the game being considered too violent and Steve Jackson backing out because of that. However, you'll then hear a conflicting story that he showed up to the studio, was asked about the violence, and he said the more violent the better. Despite these claims, it's still somewhat unclear why the deal fell through, and there are multiple accounts of what actually happened. For one, it was Interplay that dropped the license, something Tim wasn't a part of as it was self-admittedly above his pay grade. Steve Jackson would go on to explain that this news came as a surprise to him, and he didn't know why it happened, despite working alongside the team for almost 4 years. However, Fergus Urquhart, design division director for Fallout, claimed the drop was due to issues Steve had with the execution scene at the beginning of the game. Although this was just a one-off comment, and as previously stated, Steve seemed fine with the violence. The real issue seems to be thus. When the opening segment was completed, it was sent to Steve Jackson Games for approval, but was returned as rejected due to the excessive violence. Odd, since nothing else had been rejected for that reason before, and the game was hyper-violent to almost comical levels. So it became apparent that Steve Jackson Games hadn't really been looking that closely at the content provided, and should they, this could lead to major issues and revisions being necessary for Fallout, essentially a lot of red tape. Additionally, Fergus also claims that Steve wanted several changes of his own outside of the violent aspects. Things like bigger characters, more detail, and for some reason he had an issue with the Vault Boy that was depicted on all of the skills, wanting him removed entirely. Fergus continued to claim that Steve threatened to take action if Fallout was left as it was, so Interplay most likely dropped the license in order to regain creative control of the product. Sean Punch, who had worked on GURPS, stated, "Ultimately, the issue was that the license didn't word the approval process in a way that was good for either party, and it was simply easier to design a new RPG engine than to redo the licensing agreement and all of the approvals." So it doesn't sound like it was due simply to violence, nor does it make sense that Steve Jackson would not understand why the deal fell through. Rather, it seemed fairly clear. Steve Jackson tried to pressure Interplay into making changes due to the ambiguity of the approval process, and Interplay didn't want to play ball, dropping the license to move forward with a new system, or even can the game as it may have been considered too much trouble. To be clear, some of this is my personal interpretation of the issues based on all of the discussions and claims on the topic, many of which you can find sources for in the description. Give it a look and come up with your own opinion on the subject, but many publications seem to leave out these important details or get this outright wrong when discussing it online. It is no overstatement to say that Fallout has influenced so much over the years. Tim specifically credits it as the progenitor for the sandbox/open world experience, non-linear storytelling in games, multiple endings with the iconic slideshows, lack of morality with a focus on consequences, and perks that would become feats in Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, leading to a chain that connects to World of Warcraft, Oblivion, and Skyrim. Despite all the issues with pending cancellation, licensing, and the like, the team still managed to see the game shift in 1997 to critical acclaim. Universally praised as not just an amazing RPG, but an original one at that, Fallout was the catalyst that led to the CRPG renaissance and continues to influence and inspire developers to this day. But enough about the history of the game, let's look at the game itself.
You're here. Good. We've got a problem. A big one. The controller chip for our water purification system has given up the ghost. Can't make another one, and the process is too complicated for a workaround system. Simply put, we're running out of drinking water. No water, no vault. This is crucial to our survival. And frankly, I think you're the only hope we have. You need to go find us another controller chip. We estimate we have 4 to 5 months before the vault runs out of water. We need that chip. We marked your map with the location of another vault. Not a bad place to start, I think. Look, just be safe, okay?
The Vault of the Future. Fallout opens with an idolization of the 1950s and 60s as if American society had never evolved. This is intentional and is due to the advancement of nuclear power and technology in the Fallout universe. Despite taking place after the bombs fell in 2077, aspects of this idolized version of America are still present in the 2160s, although not as blatantly as they would become in future entries. The first thing I'd like to point out here, something I find important, is that you are being sold something. You are being sold the idea of a vault or bomb shelter to protect your family. It is a product that you need to buy into, it holds value, and that is, at the moment, the only reason it exists. This isn't necessarily true, the vaults have many reasons for existing, but generally, especially in the first game within the series, all we know about them at the moment is that they seem to be a product sold based on the fear of nuclear Armageddon. The idolization doesn't end there. We immediately shift to military propaganda, showcasing to us not just the manipulative nature of the government, but specifically how willing they are to show intense violence on television. People are so desensitized to violence when it comes to the enemy because they have been conditioned into not seeing the enemy as people. We watch a man executed point blank in the back of the head while 2 American soldiers wave gleefully at the camera, and this is just normal to the American people. However, where we see this idolization end is when the game zooms out to show the apocalyptic future where the setting will take place. During this, Maybe by the Ink Spots plays, originally the team wanted I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the same band, but it was too expensive to acquire the rights. Looking back, Tim mentions feeling like this worked out as the alternative track used fit well within the setting and themes of the game. Maybe You Will Think of Me When You Are All Alone is a very potent line considering the attempt to create intense isolation for the player within the wasteland. If you've seen some videos from Tim Kaine or articles on the subject, you would know that despite what Fallout has become, the point of the original wasn't to be a critique on capitalism, but a commentary on the inevitability of war. We see this within the next segments narrated by Ron Perlman. War never changes. The Romans waged war for slaves and wealth, Spain for gold and territory, Hitler created an economic superpower, and it was now due to humanity abusing the planet that resources were dwindling and everyone was fighting over what's left. America annexes Canada, China invades Alaska, and the European Commonwealth dissolves. Nuclear war erupts in 2077 and lasts 2 hours before the surface of the planet is essentially destroyed, not due to capitalism, apparently, but due to humanity's innate greed. However, despite this idea, many still like to claim that it was China's fault, especially since they have been stated to attack first. Many like to blame communism for where Fallout is today, a pitfall that is humorous due to this being exactly what America would want at the time. Propaganda becomes so incredibly prevalent within the Fallout universe and is used to villainize both China and communism to the point that it is showing us how easily people can believe what they are told and not look any further. The truth of the matter is that neither capitalism nor communism were sufficient within this setting to stop what was coming, because both of their shortcomings were humanity in the end. Every economic system will have flaws, and one of those flaws is how humanity tries to make the most of it, how to abuse it to get as much as possible, and how this will lead to war. War never changes because it's always about greed and power, and changing from capitalism to communism to socialism, whatever, doesn't change that. Despite this idea and Kaine's intentions on what is being critiqued and what isn't, we are playing a game in post-war America where capitalism ends up still being prevalent. I discussed this in depth within my Fallout 4 video.
Stepping at Tim Kaine, creator of the Fallout series, recently said in a YouTube video aptly titled Capitalism that the critique of capitalism was never the point within the original games. Tim's reasoning for this being that the game went out of its way to say that other countries were also behaving poorly. Sure, the big capitalist society is doing bad things, but look, so is the communist one. What some people don't seem to know is that Chris Avallone has recently said something similar as well, predating Tim's video with his review on the Fallout television show from Amazon. Both creators wanted to be clear that it wasn't their intention to make a critique of capitalism specifically as the main focus of their series. The original Fallout games have a central theme, that war is inevitable, and it's inevitable because it's basic human nature. Now, this has already incensed a few fans of the series into attempting to suggest that the entire series has never been about capitalism at all, but I think that's an insane surface-level look at the series overall. I'm not going to throw the death of the author at you, but just because Tim says he doesn't see the capitalist critique in his series doesn't mean it isn't there, especially when he even says, "People will interpret my games in all kinds of ways, and that's okay. Everyone brings their own perspective, and a story can mean different things to different people. Fallout as a whole is going to be interpreted differently by different people. An artist or author may see their work in a certain way, but others may be able to extrapolate more out of it. Tim sees that humanity is doomed to war, but we can look at what motivations led America to this point in comparison to China, how they seemed steeped in consumerism and capitalism, and with a game focused on the American way of life and its failings, considering that's the setting and not China, you are going to inadvertently be saying things about America's systems when critiquing the humanity within. All of this to say that while I respect Tim as the creator of the series and understand the intentions with the themes of the game, I believe there is still valuable critique to be found within, even if it is inadvertent. What I find really funny is that people are pointing to Fallout 3 onward with this gotcha mindset. Fallout 3's themes shifted dramatically when Bethesda took over, for better or for worse, and I believe I showcase how many of the themes from the original game persist, but there is added focus on capitalist critical aspects as well, even with the new television show, although I'm not planning on spoiling that show much for you guys here. Bethesda has put more of a focus on the idea of capitalism's success and failings with their iterations of the game. Even New Vegas seems to look at observing different economic and political systems to see the same thing. Before I get another comment from someone about how I'm wrong about Fallout 3 because of what Tim Kaine said about Fallout 1 and 2, and like maybe I am, I'm not infallible. Just remember that my videos are about different games in the series, and even if they weren't, the observations we make off of media are valid and worthwhile, as pointed out by Tim himself when discussing this exact concept. Despite the world being rebuilt and people trying to settle down once again, civilization is still experiencing pitfalls. The concept of earning and ownership via capitalism are still leading to a homeless epidemic. Is capitalism partially at fault here, if at all? Is it the main source of humanity's struggles in America? Is Bethesda trying to say anything with these observations? That's for you to decide. I'm deciding for me and conveying that to you, but it's for you to decide. As Tim states, everyone brings their own perspective.
With that said, we can understand better that, while not a purposeful critique on capitalism, this lens into humanity's greed within the setting of a post-apocalyptic America continues to showcase both humanity in general, as well as the systems that have been put in place, including capitalism. It's not the focus, but it inadvertently becomes an aspect of the central themes surrounding the subject matter. You could have said the same about communism if the game was centered in China, but it isn't. This is about the failings of America and how they tried to grow from that while still falling for the same greed that got them there in the first place. By the way, Tim has a channel on YouTube full of videos offering insight into the development experience of Fallout and everything else he worked on. Just a huge personal blog with valuable info worth checking out. So how do we begin exploring this wasteland? Well, first we need to understand who we are as a character. Your family was some of the members of Vault 13, a community that continues to live in the Vault during the events of Fallout 1. While the game may feel as though you will be the first to step outside the safety of it, you are at least the third individual to be sent out of the wasteland, and we even get to meet the individual from 13 way later in the game once we reach Boneyard. Fallout has a fairly simplistic character creator, all things considered. There's no way to edit or change the look of your sprite when you play, other than, armor. You'll never see your own face, and all that character creation is for is specifically your stats and how you will interact with the wasteland. Emulating pen and paper role-playing games, you have various aspects that you can use to define and showcase your character without them being outwardly visible. If you choose to, you can select one of the 3 predetermined characters and will even be given a small portrait of what they are supposed to look like as well as a short backstory. Fallout as a game is more interesting to me when you carve out your own backstory and make a character who will play exactly as you want them to. While you can adjust the pre-made characters, you can also start from scratch, and that freedom is both enjoyable but also useful to us if one of our main focuses is being effective. Within the character creator, you can create your name but also select your age and gender. Unfortunately, these are mostly for flavor. Age doesn't affect anything in the game from what I can tell, and gender may just change dialogue here and there. It's just there for role-playing purposes, which can be fine, but this would still be improved upon in Fallout 2. As most of us are all used to, the first thing you'll focus on is setting your special stats, which stand for Strength, Perception, Endurance, Charisma, Intelligence, Agility, and Luck. You'd be forgiven for thinking they built the system around that name, but Tim Cain suggests that isn't the case. Rather, they had the stats and wanted to turn them into an acronym afterward, and Tim came up with ACE-LIPS, which was later vetoed for special. The man isn't great at acronyms, but then again, I probably wouldn't be either. Starting out, each of your specials will be a value of 5 or average. You can bring these down to 1 for very bad or up to 10 for heroic. 10 is the max possible in Fallout 1 as it is in other entries, although sometimes there's leeway there depending on what we are talking about. It's more strict from what I can tell in this original entry, and even things like surgeries you can get to increase it don't let you breach the maximum value. Fallout 1 has surgeries that can be completed with the Brotherhood of Steel for each stat other than Charisma and Luck. However, both of these can be increased by at least 1 point in-game through different means. Additionally, while not a permanent increase, power armor can boost your strength by several points as long as you are wearing it. And you probably won't stop wearing it as soon as you acquire it, since Fallout has a pretty linear gear progression system. But why mention how to get all of these points? You have 2 options going into Fallout. You either build blind to create a playstyle that you think works best for you, setting up role-playing scenarios such as being stupid, a cowboy, whatever, or you maximize as much as you can. Personally, I love maximizing. While you should just build for what you think is cool on your first go-around, Fallout has the issue of several aspects of a character's stats being effectively useless, despite one of the rules of the game's development being no useless skills. Charisma, as an example, is a dump stat. There's virtually no reason to put any points into it due to persuasion attempts being dictated by intelligence and the speech skill. The main reason you may decide to invest in it is because each special stat is tied to an assortment of skills, and raising the special will raise the minimum starting value of the skill for you. It can also help with unlocking some perks. Skills suffer from the same issue. Many of the skills, while potentially being useful for role-playing and niche purposes, are so ineffective in the grand scheme of what Fallout provides, you may feel annoyed that you invested any points in them to begin with. Take Outdoorsman, for instance. A skill that helps alleviate the time lost in random encounters involving dehydration and rock falls. Useless. You'll never see that. You might see it, but you'll really never see it. I never saw it this entire playthrough. Certain aspects of character creation and growth are so useless that many had to be reworked to have additional functionality moving forward with Fallout 2. Strength affects the amount of weight you can carry, as well as which weapons you can use effectively. Attempting to use a heavier weapon without meeting their strength requirements leads to an accuracy penalty per point of difference. Perception affects your initiative, or how soon you start within a fight sequence, and helps with chance to hit based on distance when using ranged weapons. Endurance is mostly for hit points and resistances to poison and radiation. I'd almost call this a dump stat similar to Charisma because the health gain is so minimal in comparison to the amount of defense and power you will get through weapons, armor, and boosting your other stats. You are almost never poisoned in this game, and radiation can be bypassed for 24 in-game hours by popping 2 Rad-X. Charisma is as useless as I mentioned previously, and later becomes tied to the amount of companions you can have in your party in Fallout 2. However, it does affect part of the calculations when determining an NPC's reaction towards you. Characters have initial reactions to the player based on several factors, and having a poor initial reaction can sometimes lock you out of interacting with them. Intelligence is perhaps the most important stat in the game, as it calculates how many skill points you get per level up, as well as being a part of persuasion checks, which opens up a boatload of options due to the game's design of attempting to allow everything to be solved through dialogue. However, with low enough intelligence, you can become stupid, and this is reflected heavily within your dialogue and interactions with other characters. You get 5 points for skills per level up, plus double your intelligence, so a character with 10 int should get a total of 25 skill points per level, but there is a trait that changes this. Agility is also one of the more important stats as it affects your action points. Players used to modern Fallout games will remember that action points were used in conjunction with the VAT system, and that's a bit different here. In Fallout 1, you start with 5 action points and can add an additional point for every 2 points in agility, so 5 points plus half of your agility rounded down. This makes planning for agility a little more involved, as if you start with, say, 8 agility, you have no reason to buy the surgery that would upgrade it to 9, as nothing would change outside some skill values. The only perk that requires more than 8 agility requires 10, so I always find it best to start with 9 and upgrade it later. You'll be spending action points to move, attack, and even enter your inventory when in combat, so we'll talk about that more in a moment. Finally, luck is mainly used for critical hit rate and unique encounters. While subjects on it claim to affect invisible dice rolls behind the scenes, I can't figure out what that actually means. What we do know is that unique encounters require high luck to run into consistently, and even with 8 in luck, I still didn't see them naturally after extensive traveling. I like to have luck at least somewhat high and then invest into gambling a little, as you can make infinite money this way, although that's a bit power gamey. I also won't be going into all of the unique random encounters. There's some fun ones that are hard to actually get to spawn. You can go find them or find a list about them online. They're not super important to what I want to talk about. I'm also not going to go through all of the skills, but I'll explain a few aspects about them. Generally, your most important skill you're going to have is whichever combat skill you want to focus on, and after that it's probably speech. Everything else in this game is more situational. A combat skill will determine, from what I have come to understand, your chance to hit based on distance. The more points you put into small guns, the more accurately you will shoot from further away. However, skills only have a maximum of 95% to hit, so you may find yourself getting to a point where it no longer makes sense to invest in the skill. And then you focus on something else like energy weapons, which I like to do. You can tag 3 skills during character creation and then potentially a third thanks to a perk. These skills get an initial boost in percentage and also increase by 2% per skill point instead of 1. Skills can be increased past the 100% value to 200% in Fallout 1 and 300% in Fallout 2. Calculations between your character and what they are interacting with dictate different percentage outcomes. Just because you have 100% in small guns doesn't mean you have 100% chance to hit an enemy at any range. So you can keep increasing these values if you deem it necessary, but I'll let you in on a little secret. It never is. You can complete the game with just a small gun skill at 100, although energy weapons blow that out of the water. Sometimes you might want to increase it past 100% just to get that extra range while still hitting at a 95% hit rate. Additionally, just because your generic attack hits for 95% doesn't mean your aimed shots will do the same on every limb, so you may want to make that more consistent as well. It's a little confusing in terms of presentation, but not difficult to get the hang of. Skills can be broken down into 3 categories: combat, active abilities, and passive abilities. Speech, barter, gambling, and outdoorsman are all passive, and everything from small guns to throwing weapons are combat. Here's some skills I found effectively useless. Barter will be useless even if you don't spam gambling. You will always be able to make a ton of money in this game due to various factors. An example would be turning your companions into pack mules and then selling to other merchants, though that's also a little power gamey and I feel like it was kind of unintended. The skill helps, but why bother when there are so many better ones? Outdoorsman is also useless for reasons I explained previously, and the same can be said for first aid, which might be some people might not agree with that. Not only does it cost 30 minutes of time in the day, but can only be used 3 times per day and you'll be swimming in stim packs anyway. Doctor is only marginally better due to healing crippled limbs, which I never experienced in this run to the point that I forgot it was a mechanic. Everything else in the game feels like it has some sort of more front-facing use that doesn't feel like a waste. Even stealing can be somewhat useful if you want to actively take things or plant items on enemies, but rarely if ever is this utilized in a quest for a stealth option. I don't know, I just think it's funny to look back on the game that was supposed to have no useless skills and have several examples of both skills and abilities that one could consider dump stats. Of course, that's an opinionated look on it, and you can find your own use for anything really, but just looking at them from a surface level of trying to play and complete the game, including all optional content, I would never see a reason to utilize these. I didn't utilize them. The final aspect we can choose to define our character for the run are optional traits. These made a reappearance in New Vegas for modern Fallout games and again in Outer Worlds. These generally provide a positive and negative effect to balance them out, but some are clearly better than others, usually due to oversights in the game though, so take that how you will. Small frame gives you an extra point in agility but lowers your carry weight, but that's not an issue due to how you can stuff companions with as much loot as you want. Gifted puts an extra point into every special stat, which is bonkers. The cost of this is that you lose the 5 base skill points per level, and all skills take an additional negative 10% penalty. This might sound harsh, but the amount of skill points you receive and the amount of skills you'll actually be investing in, it's more than enough to make this trait a must-have. There's no reason to not take it outside of not enjoying how strong it is. Fallout 1 has a balancing issue in that sense. The only difficulty of the game is not understanding something initially. It doesn't take practice to be good at it. Eventually it's just solved, and the only way to make it more difficult or elaborate is through self-imposed challenges. That isn't the end of the world, but it is a bit disappointing, and something Fallout 2 would look to remedy in various ways with more limitations and restrictions. You have various other stats displayed as well. Some are self-explanatory, but others not so much. Armor class and damage resistance we will talk about in the combat section alongside other elements like damage threshold. Once you have created your character, you'll be met with a scene of the Overseer. While this is just an FMV, we will experience many dialogues using this talking head style that Bethesda would begin to emulate with their own releases. These heads were Leonard Boyarsky's idea and originally sculpted out of clay and then scanned into the game and animated. According to Tim, each head took 4 man-months of work, explaining why they are few and far between your journey through the wasteland. The Overseer explains that the water purification chip for Vault 13 has died and it's too difficult to repair, with no replacements in the vicinity. No chip means no vault since you will run out of drinkable water. The Overseer needs someone to go out and find a replacement within the wasteland, and our character is considered the best for the job. It's made clear to us and the player that there are only 150 in-game days, with most of this passing via traveling. However, time is incredibly important as a feature in Fallout 1. It passes even when standing still in towns, when reading skill books, when getting surgeries, etc. All of these aspects bring you one step closer to a game over if you aren't paying attention, although 150 days is a lenient amount of time if you have any semblance of an idea of what you are doing. During the original release of the game, there was a separate 500-day timer that would lead to a game over, even if you brought the chip back. This is even more lenient for the amount of content in the game, but it was almost immediately taken out in patch 1.1 due to negative reception, and Tim seems to agree with them. During his GDC talk, he laments over the timers and states he would remove all timed quests if he could go back, as he doesn't want individuals to miss out on content just because of how they were exploring. However, that's kind of the beauty of Fallout 1 and something he even praises due to the non-linear progression it facilitates. The sense of urgency with having the initial time limit at first can feel stressful, I agree, but stress can be a great feeling in games like these. I'm not playing Fallout 1 to chill out, I'm playing it to feel a sense of isolation and dread, to stress myself out a little bit because that's what the world is asking of me in this stress-fueled role-playing game. I'm not the biggest fan of extraction shooters or games where you permanently lose loot when you die, but you can't tell me that it doesn't feel great to get away with all of your stuff or someone else's or more. The rush comes from the initial stress and adrenaline, and Fallout seems to try and facilitate this as best it can. I can understand the dislike or criticism though. The nature of the timer before you realize it hardly matters kept me from attempting to play the game for some time because it sounded so daunting. But it's a short game and not one you are meant to succeed in right away. You can complete all of Fallout's content fairly quickly and easily if you know what's going on, so every dead end feels more like a learning experience before you start over. Additionally, missable side quests are a personal favorite of mine. I do understand the time limit potentially soft-locking a player being annoying, but Fallout is such a short game in terms of in-game time, you really have to go out of your way to do this. The mutant time limit even made sense to the storyline provided. I more wish they stuck to their guns with these limits as they helped create a unique experience you weren't getting anywhere else. While you could argue the removal of the time limit, I believe it is integral to the game's experience. It allows certain quests to become available and even transforms the landscape of somewhere like Necropolis if you wait too long before visiting or after doing certain actions when you were there. It makes the world feel alive, and that is a pretty big feat from a game, especially back then. With our objectives set and the time limit known, the Overseer sends us on our way, pointing us towards Vault 15 as our first objective in attempting to locate the chip. However, when we exit the vault, we find ourselves in a cave full of rats, and this area will act a bit like a practice run of what is to come. Less of a tutorial and more of throwing you into the thick of it. Luckily, you can press F1 on your keyboard and a handy infographic will show you everything you need to know in order to play the game properly. The lack of hand-holding is intentional though, considering the game is about being thrust into an unknown, heavily isolated world. Once you have control, there's a lot to learn about how movement and interacting with objects/people works. The entirety of the game can be played with the mouse buttons if you wish, and you can pull up a list of your active skills and select them to use. You can right-click to switch to an interaction mode, and hold the button to be given different options. And you can use this to examine almost anything. It feels like a point-and-click adventure in that sense. You can enter your inventory at the push of a button, swap between equipped weapons, and more, and almost all of these features can be completed using keyboard shortcuts as well, which are all listed on the infographic. It feels a little stiff and obtuse at first, namely due to its age, but becomes seamless with time. I really do mean it when I call it a product of its time. Even saving feels somewhat archaic. Not only do you only have 10 save slots to work with, but your quick saves need to be assigned to one of these and then reassigned whenever you save or load a manual one. Little things like that feel odd to get used to at first, but like I said already, it becomes sort of seamless as you get used to it and forget it's even an issue. You have a Pip-Boy 2000 to help guide you through your travels. It has several functions, but the one you will probably use the most is the clock system that lets you pass time to specific points in the day or by specific intervals. Something I found really annoying here is that changing the time to morning isn't actually morning. It's usually still dark outside and no one will be open for business. However, the next point you can speed up to is noon, so what you end up doing is passing the time until morning and then passing another hour or two, which seems like an oversight to me. I think we all know why they gave you the morning option. It was probably so that you could go to shops and stuff like that, because they do close. On top of the clock, you'll have your auto maps, which are the local maps you'd find in Fallout 3 onward, as well as a status screen where you can track whether or not you have completed quests in various areas you found, or read information found on holodisks. And they are there to provide various lore and context for the goings-on around the world, or potentially hints as to where to go next. Keep in mind, while we are told to go to Vault 15, that doesn't mean what we seek will be there, or that it will tell us where to go next. There's a lot of self-driven investigation and exploration needed to stumble upon Necropolis and realize there's a water chip there. Also, there's an archive tab that lets you watch any FMVs you've previously seen. There's a broken button with a scratched out label, which would have been used for clues of some sort. This was present in at least one of the demos for the game, although I couldn't get said demo running properly on my computer. There is video footage of this button you can find online, and Tim Cain has a video discussing 6 demos of Fallout that you can check out by looking at the citation list in the description. So, we are thrust into a dark cave, alone and with very little going on. Even the music of Fallout is hardly ever there, usually ambient drones or sounds you may hear from the environment you are currently in. Maybe whispers that you feel in the back of your skull. It's dreadful, and that's the point. You are alone. Your only companion is a corpse of another Vault 13 resident named Ed, who is one of 2 former Vault 13 residents we can run into. Everywhere you go is silent, and if not silent, it feels like you have a ghost following behind you as you explore. Sirens sometimes droning on and on. The score accompanies the journey, the sense of loneliness, and even when you find civilization, it still feels the same. You are meant to return when you have the chip, and when you do, you can explore the interior of Vault 13. However, if you wait a few hours, the door becomes unlocked anyway, and you can head in to complete a quest or 2. Namely, convincing some rebels to not leave the vault, or stop a water thief. I didn't really go too far into these specific quests in this script. If you don't convince the rebels, they leave after a set amount of time, another example of time passing in Fallout. It's pretty difficult to do as well. You seem to only get one attempt at that speech check, and these checks require a minimum amount of intelligence to even have the chance to be successful. So if you don't realize this, you can lock yourself out of being able to keep them there. It's not like that's a major issue, you just miss out on some experience and maybe some other rewards. But it shows that, despite having the ability to talk people out of things, it won't always work, and the world can be shaped based on both your actions and the roll of a dice. You aren't all powerful, some things just end up being out of your hands. Clean and in pristine condition, Vault 13 is the safest place you will ever visit in the original game, but even then, we've seen many have their own issues here. Nothing's perfect, but some are so done with the vault that they want to risk the wasteland. This is great foreshadowing for the very end of the game, and this is the last thing the Overseer wants to allow to happen. Combat can be triggered manually or automatically. At any point, you can enter into a combat state yourself if you so wish. Everyone is killable, and while this can lock you out of some quests, it doesn't prevent you from completing the game, unless you specifically attack Vault 13, considering that is the entire point of the adventure. Everyone is a potential target, including kids, but you'll have to live with the consequences just as Tim intended. I'd say more often than not you will be running into combat more than you'll be triggering it, but what do I know? If you are in a position where you are in the enemy's field of vision and range, you will provoke them and combat will be initiated. Fallout is a turn-based experience inspired by the rules of pen and paper RPGs. One aspect of that is initiative or sequence, a stat based on your perception. The higher your sequence, the sooner you get your turn in a round, but the real benefit is how it acts to save you from dangerous situations or allows you to completely dominate an encounter right at the start. Whoever initiates combat gets a free turn against their target, and the target then gets the same. After this surprise round, the real battle will begin with all active participants. This means your character could attack an enemy, surprise them, have them react, and then get to attack immediately if their initiative is high enough. And this is a great way to clear out multiple enemies before anyone else gets a turn. Conversely, enemies or characters with low initiative must wait longer to act, and this can lead to them getting overpowered early. So you can understand then why perception may be considered one of the more important special stats, but that's far from the only thing that goes into a battle. There's several other stats I brought up briefly that we can go into more detail about now. Armor class is a number generated by your gear and is used in combat to see if you get hit by an attack at all, or rather if that hit is effective. Take the percentage chance to hit and subtract the armor class from it, say 95% subtract 9. This gives you a value of 86, and the game will roll against that. The system will then roll a number between 1 and 100, and if that number is less than or equal to the armor class, the attack will hit and proceed into damage calculation. Damage threshold is the midpoint in this system. If you do get hit, the game then looks at what type of damage it was and then subtracts the relevant damage threshold value from it. It's a pure reduction to damage that you can find in your inventory when looking over how your armor affects your defenses. Armor will give you varying damage thresholds for normal, laser, fire, plasma, and explosive damage sources. But looking at it, you may be asking what the percentage beside the threshold number is. That's your damage resistance, which is, yes, different. Damage resistance is only calculated if, after the threshold calculation, there is still damage left over. The idea is that armor class decides if the attack even hits you or is effective. Damage threshold determines how much the armor mitigates the damage to the point it still may not be effective, and damage resistance is sort of the fall off and absorption of the rest. However, damage resistance is not a flat reduction, but a percentage-based one that can never go higher than 90% reduction. If your armor can't prevent the damage, all you can do is mitigate it, and not fully. These aspects of combat are nice to understand, but hardly necessary for a casual or even more challenging playthrough of the game. The truth is, you will naturally progress through tiers of armor as you play, and rarely if ever is there any variance. A leather jacket to leather armor to metal armor, metal to combat, etc. With a few small caveats, you will linearly upgrade your armor as you progress. The caveats here are that something like metal armor may have lower resistances to certain damage than leather armor, as well as 10 AC to leather's 15. So between those two, you may decide one fits better for you in a given scenario. Metal is also heavier than leather, but it hardly matters in the grand scheme of things when in combat scenarios. Children of the Cathedral robes are also an exception, as they are wearable and do offer defensive properties, but are not meant for combat purposes. You also find them fairly late into the game usually. From there, combat armor goes into power armor unless you find some specific alternatives. For example, Brotherhood armor is an upgraded version of combat armor, but if you are already visiting the Brotherhood, you will almost certainly bypass this option and go straight to power armor, as it is so easy to obtain at this point. Finally, power armor can be upgraded later for one of the best pieces of equipment you can obtain, and there's unique Tesla armor you can find meant to help with one specific scenario at the end of the game. I didn't even know Tesla armor existed in Fallout 1 until making this video. Weapons are really where things are more up to you in terms of effectiveness. It's generally considered that the plasma rifle, when upgraded, is the best weapon in the game next to the alien blaster, but maybe that doesn't fit your playstyle. Armor won't affect your ability to perform actions, but weapons can change your fighting style. Maybe you prefer to be close range with melee weapons, shotguns, hand-to-hand, etc., or maybe you wish to be long range. The issue is that, knowing how effective certain weapons are, if you go the long-range route, I don't see why you would choose anything other than the plasma rifle or blaster if you find it. This means there's very little reason to have variety within your equipment within the game. The player can hold 2 weapons at a time, but there is rarely any reason to outside of maybe running out of ammo. It's an issue with balance, and it can feel like a waste to invest in multiple different types of weapons when some are astoundingly better than others. The only reason people even use small guns outside of role-playing purposes is because the skill starts fairly high at the start, and you won't be seeing energy weapons for some time. Strength requirements are meant to help prevent this somewhat. If you don't have high strength, you may not be able to effectively use some of these stronger weapons. Really, it starts to feel like you are just making do until the game finally decides to give you the good stuff, but it's still a great feeling once you finally get your hands on combat armor for the first time, or power armor, especially due to the bonus and strength it provides. In fact, power armor invalidates the whole point I just made about strength because it provides a +3 bonus to the stat, which is huge, and more than enough unless you started with a very low strength stat. So how do we actually fight someone in this game? I mentioned it previously, but Fallout works on a hexagonal grid. Your agility dictates how much AP you have, and you can have a maximum of 10 AP total, with some perks that affect this amount in various ways, or affect the cost of certain actions. Generally speaking, I don't see why you wouldn't want to have a maximum of 10 AP as soon as possible. Most weapons early on, at least for range, take 5 AP just to fire a regular shot, with aim shots taking an additional AP, reloading taking 2, and opening your inventory taking several as well. Just to get 2 shots off with a 10mm early on requires 10 full AP to do so. Someone optimizing or wanting the same for you will tell you to take 9 agility at the start of the game since you can upgrade it once at the Brotherhood of Steel, but most players will end up at the Brotherhood at best within the mid to end point of the game, and this can mean you are stuck 1 AP short for a very large chunk of time. It's whatever fits your playstyle, of course, and some perks are meant to allow you to not worry about such a steep investment in a single stat. However, we will soon see that these perks are few and far between, a last-minute inclusion, and some are simply so much better that there is no reason to take anything else. Every time you move on the grid, you expend 1 AP per tile, so really you are not expected to be able to shoot multiple times per turn right away regardless of investments, as you will need to move closer to have a proper chance at landing your shot until you invest more into skills. So there is some balance there, it just feels unsatisfying to me and I look to reduce this cost as soon as possible. But that's a reason to focus on a build and not a slight against the design of the combat system. Really, you are meant to take multiple actions per turn, such as firing, reloading, and moving all at once. Firing is just the tool that ends these combat scenarios, so it's going to cost more to use it. Weapons can have different firing rates that you can cycle through. Cycling between rates or swapping between your 2 equipped weapons doesn't cost AP, but the different rates will generally be more expensive. A single shot is cheaper than burst fire on a 10mm SMG as an example. What can get really annoying is how the game tries to provide you so much info about your chance to hit, firing rate, and cost to attack, etc., but doesn't inform you whether or not you're about to hit someone you didn't mean to. In one scenario, the more forgivable one, you will sometimes miss your shot, and it will instead hit another target, friendly or not, who is within the immediate vicinity of the original. This is both intentional and without warning because it is an accident. One that I can't control because I took the risk to fire while someone was near my enemy. Usually this ends up being dog meat. With burst fire, 10 shots are fired off in a cone, but the cone is unknown to the player and no warning is provided on whether or not additional targets will take damage. I understand Fallout is a game that doesn't hold your hand, but it is also a strategy game in some sense. Generally, a large aspect of that is understanding what your weapons do and how it will affect the environment around you, right? But there is none of that here, and you will often be surprised that a burst shot somehow managed to hit a friendly companion who you believed to be out of the line of fire. I think there's a fair answer to this issue though. If there had been a perk to provide this sort of information, the game could have required an investment for you to obtain it, similar to awareness, a perk that allows you to see the HP values of the targets we are facing at the time. Similar to awareness, a perk that allows us to see the HP values of the targets we are facing at the time. But that is unfortunately not the case, and many battles can feel like a mess and not in a fun way where everything's going to hell. Instead, in ways that feel unfair to the player interacting with the mechanics. A common misconception about classic and modern Fallout games is that VATS always existed. In reality, VATS as a system was a reimagining of aimed shots from classic Fallout games and created by Bethesda. Aimed shots work similarly. At the cost of an additional AP point, you can perform an aimed shot at a specific body part, usually limbs, eyes, etc., but generally there's a comedic option in there as well, most commonly the groin. Shooting these specific areas takes greater accuracy but offers additional damage or debuff benefits, such as crippling the opponent. It's nice but usually unnecessary to think about much. It's almost always beneficial to go for the eyes from my experience, and you'll learn this the best when you're hunting your first Deathclaw. It adds that bit of extra strategy, but it's not necessary, and you can get through the game just fine without ever using it. I still recommend it though. With the right setup, 2 aimed shots per round is generally possible, and you will be surprised how much havoc you can begin to wreak with that kind of power unlocked. However, I wouldn't say that makes the combat incredibly deep by any means. You aren't unlocking various abilities that change the course of the battle or make them more elaborate. You are shooting at enemies and they are shooting at you, and you are just figuring out how to deal as much damage as quickly and consistently as possible. There's aspects of that which one may consider depth and strategy, but what you soon start to realize is that the game is more about dealing with every clusterfuck by overpowering it or abusing the game's limitations to your advantage. Standing in a door to keep your companions from running around with their heads cut off, or allowing yourself to get surrounded sounds cool on paper, but now you are getting shot by both enemies and your companions because they don't know any better. Companions really do screw you over sometimes, almost as much as they help. There is little to no control over them both in combat and out, to the point that they and even other NPCs can trap you in doorways with no means of getting out. It only happened once during this playthrough, but I had a scenario where an NPC would not move no matter how long I waited, to the point that I had to reload a save. The devs knew the AI sucked too. They weren't in the original design of the game and were added with no time to program them in properly, leading to many bugs surrounding them. Many of the reasons the AI would do incredibly stupid actions, such as Ian using burst on an SMG despite it obviously going to hit you as well, is because they didn't have the time to fix issues like that. Within the settings menu of the game, you have 2 separate difficulty dials, one for combat and another for general gameplay. Gameplay only affects the bonus or penalty value of various skills in the game. If you choose easy mode, you'll have a 20-point bonus to all non-combat skills. Playing on normal has no bonus, and playing on hard has a 10-point penalty. Combat skills, meanwhile, experience no change regardless of game or combat difficulty. Wimpy lowers enemy accuracy by -20%, while Rough increases it by the same value. Similarly, damage received will be lowered or raised depending on your selection, and more enemies will be able to perform aimed shots due to their ability to do so being based on an intelligence check. You won't personally be any better or worse off when it comes to attacking an enemy regardless of the difficulty, but enemies will change significantly. As you fight enemies, you may notice you don't immediately gain experience points. This is due to the game calculating all of the enemies you killed as soon as combat fully ends and then giving the EXP to you as a total. Completing quests and just small feats can also provide experience in bulk. Once you have enough, you'll level up, with a maximum level of 21 in the original game. Each time you level, the amount of experience necessary increases by 1,000. Getting from 19 to 20 requires a full 19,000 experience, while 20 to 21 requires another full 20,000. Although you'll never come close to this casually. Health points increase with each level at a rate of half your endurance plus 2. However, the real benefit of a level is being able to mess with your skills, which you gain points for based on your intelligence and perks. Perks are obtained every 3 levels until you reach the cap of 21. They were a last-minute inclusion as Brian Fargo wanted more than skill raises during a level up. Chris Taylor came up with the idea for perks and Fargo thought it was perfect. This last-minute change would affect games in the industry moving forward forever. Since perks are few and far between, the ones you select have a lot of weight to them. However, while there are a good amount to select, many are considered so much more beneficial than others that a good chunk gets left by the wayside. The benefit of perks is to allow characters to feel different between players and playthroughs, but with how rarely they show up, this adds to the value of the universally good perks. Sure, there are some that are better for a melee or hand-to-hand character over a ranged one, usually acting as an alternative to the same perk, but something like awareness is generally considered one of the best perks in the game and a must-have. There are 53 perks, and you could, at most, have 7 of them. And you won't have 7 casually because you will never hit max level, so you can understand how these would begin to get ranked by universal effectiveness. Still, leveling feels like it has a lot of weight to it. When you do choose those perks, it can feel as though plenty of opportunities have opened up to you. Your level of knowledge in combat is increased tremendously with awareness and can help guide your decision making. Personally, I was surprised to see they had perks that could be chosen multiple times in a row in a game like this considering how few are available. It would have been much better to have these be options that could only be chosen once within a later build, and more effective because of that. Just like modern Fallouts, the selection presented to you has level and special prerequisites, so it would make sense to buff these multi-use perks and have them show up as you level. Every area in the game will have at least 1 or 2 exit points. A green zone takes you to another sub-area of the area you are in, and a red zone takes you to the world map. Fallout's world map is based on a grid of New California, specifically the southern end of it, and Fallout 2 would keep this setting while moving north. The game provides a fog of war of sorts, considering your character still has no idea about the landscape of the wasteland. To clear that, you need to travel around, and you can do so easily by clicking anywhere you wish and watching your little red dot explore across the land as time passes by. Traveling in Fallout is extremely boring at a surface level. Just like with Dragon Age Origins, what makes it more exciting is the possibility of random encounters. You can run into combat, merchants, and even unique encounters based on your luck stat, and all of these will place you in a map designed to emulate where you are currently. Are you in the ruins of a lost city? You'll see plenty of that in a small map that you can usually easily exit from the edges. In the desert, it's the same deal. Even without a random encounter, if you stop in any given area, you can enter it to complete actions for your character that are not possible from the overworld, although this is rarely, if ever, necessary. What is most important about the world map are points of interest. Every area in Fallout is explorable from the get-go, you just have to find it. But the wasteland is a large and dangerous place. You have no real idea of where anything is, and the only way to find that out is by talking to people. Looking at the map, you can see that we have a list of locations, and most of them start blocked out, aside from Vault 15 because the Overseer pointed us towards it. At first, this sort of feels like a waypoint. We have a quest to find a water chip, and Vault 15 is our end goal at the moment, but this isn't really the case. It'll become more clear in a moment that these aren't waypoints, but points of interest. Once we finish in Vault 15, we don't really have a guaranteed or straightforward path to follow. It becomes a search, and these locations are just areas we can explore to learn more. There is never any hand-holding in this sense, and that is great news for people that like to villainize waypoints all the time. I personally don't have an issue with them, as I have stated previously, but this definitely has its own appeal. However, there are hints, paths the developers expect you to take that help you learn more about the surrounding area and where to find that in which you seek. Take Shady Sands as an example. Chances are that Vault 15 won't be your first stop in the wasteland. If you select a location you have learned about on your map, the game will auto-route your character towards it. Vault 15 is directly east of 13, and in between that is the settlement known as Shady Sands. Considering this would be your first time running into one of these locations, with its green circle fairly alluring in contrast to the rest of the wastes, stopping here is almost a given. You don't have to, but it's a natural way to guide the player's eyes to a location that will help them progress further by offering new information. For example, Shady Sands provides characters that, when talked to, can inform you of locations like Junktown, the Hub, etc. These will then appear as selectable locations on your map and you can pass towards them, or you can scroll around the map and see them visible within the fog, choosing how to get there yourself. Much of the exploration in Fallout comes from blindly exploring the map as you see fit, but if that isn't something you enjoy, you don't have to. The game slowly helps you put the puzzle pieces together until all of the important locations are known to you, and you can bounce between them with more direction rather than looking for them with no guidance. It's up to you, and part of the non-linearity and freedom the game looks to offer. Our first stop on our journey, Shady Sands, is by far one of the most important areas within the lore of Fallout, but nothing more than a farming settlement constantly accosted by raiders and rad scorpions in the moment. Run by Aradesh, the town of Shady Sands has managed to make something out of nothing, growing crops, providing clean water, and generally being as self-sufficient as possible. This in turn makes them a target due to how small and relatively weak they are as a community. One of the things you may notice when approaching a settlement is that you are asked to put your gun away. Unfortunately, this is not as simple as it seems. Fallout has 2 weapon slots, meaning you can swap between 2 different weapons in combat if you so choose. Unfortunately, there is no holster command, so no matter what you do, if you have 2 weapons equipped, you will always have one out, and this can lead to some problems with reaction towards you when talking to individuals, or even greater repercussions due to not following the rules. To remedy this, you need to have 1 weapon equipped and then swap to your empty weapon slot as a bypass for this issue, which is very annoying if you plan on using more than 1 weapon at any given time. Ranged and melee, put one of them back in your inventory and hope you don't run into a combat scenario because it costs action points to open your inventory so you can re-equip something. It's odd to have a mechanic like holstering your weapon and not given an option to just do so naturally, and is one of the many clunkier aspects of the game that begins to show its age. Finding Aradesh, we can learn a bit more about the town, such as the raids and rad scorpions. More importantly, we can get an outlook on what kind of community he is running here. Aradesh didn't just assume leadership himself, he was elected, showing us that even within the wasteland, things like democracy, the voice of the people, can still be alive and well. While Shady Sands has its own share of issues, it is a strong community, and Aradesh is regarded as a great leader as well as a hero by some. It also has a religious aspect to it, with some referring to a figure known as Dharma, whom Aradesh revered. While it is unclear within the conversations if Dharma was truly real, or just someone to be revered, it is clear that it is tied to the real-world equivalent of Dharma as a religious concept. Generally, Dharma encompasses many meanings from Indian religions that are difficult to translate clearly. Most important of them, though, are the moral implications as well as work towards sustainability. Morality is held in high regard. Helping others and keeping things working for the betterment of the people are key tenets that Aradesh and many other residents of Shady Sands seem to follow, although this would fall to the wayside more and more as Shady Sands later developed into the NCR. While not inherently bad or evil, the Republic would go on to amass power and assert that power on those weaker than them. Still, to see these concepts not only practiced, but generally welcomed within the community shows us that things aren't as bad as they could be. The game of isolation and dread is already showing us that hope and growth within humanity is still possible. The game about how humanity is constantly failing, constantly going to war and harming one another, shows that humanity equally has the capacity to do good, to help one another, and while many may try to capitalize on that, while the world may even be destroyed in the process, hope and goodness still grows from the ashes like a phoenix once again taking form after death. Humanity may be inclined to hurt, but they are just as inclined to help, and you can choose to help them as well. The wasteland as it is at the moment is a dangerous place, full of greed, pain, and suffering, but it too is full of hope, empathy, and kindness. It's a showcase of how people in the world are two sides of the same coin. A person has just as much potential to do right as they are to do wrong, and it's our choices and goals, our willpower against greed, that can help define what type of person we are. Not always greed, but as the opening segment of the game has shown us, it's almost always that which fuels these wars: greed and hate. Through that, even the people that you consider good or just may find themselves entangled with death and destruction, and it's a constant internal battle being waged within a growing, evolving society. People like to look back on the original Fallout games as these gritty, dark, and hopeless experiences. The jovial nature of the more modern games, their jokes and the like, are sometimes seen as a removal of what made the originals great. But even back then, in the original game, Fallout as a series has always had humor and a light within the darkness. It has always shown us both the best and the worst of humanity, and I don't think that has changed. Beyond the shadow you settle for, there is a miracle illuminated. We can find an individual in the town, a caravan guard who was injured during a job. He was taken care of by the residents of Shady Sands and became a part of their community. While slightly isolated, Shady Sands grows based on its goodwill, its willingness to help anyone if they need it. Ian is our first potential companion and the easiest to run into. For $100 he will join up with you, but you can also get him to do it for free by using a speech check. That's something you might start to notice. Speech checks and the like are not labeled as such. You may not realize you are even attempting one and wouldn't know if it would succeed or fail. Maybe a character is just programmed to tell you no, or maybe there is a chance that they can say yes. Not showcasing that aspect isn't as commonplace in future entries, but I always thought it was nice for first playthroughs as it helps prevent you from focusing on whether or not you are successful and allows conversations to flow more naturally without you feeling the need to save scum. I should also mention that there is a tell me about system where you can manually input a word, and if the NPC knows something about it, they will give you additional dialogue on the subject. It's a cool concept tied to similar experiences in text-based adventures and the like, but I didn't really understand the purpose or why it was implemented in Fallout outside of little tiny lore drops here and there. Companions in Fallout 1 may have small backstories, but once they are in your group, that is all you will hear about it. They are there as an afterthought, to be expendable, and while this leads to some annoyances, they can also be one of the most useful tools in your playthrough. I've briefly gone over the issues with companions. They can get in your way, shoot you without remorse, and even mistakes on your part or accidents due to rolls can turn them against you because you shot them in the back. They are a liability before anything else, but they are the best pack mules you will ever run into. There is no easy way to trade in Fallout with a companion. There is a barter system you can use with any NPC, where you see their available inventory and trade with them using items of equal worth or bottle caps, but that is not the same as just handing things to your followers, as that process doesn't really exist. Instead, there's a bit of a broken mess that allows our companions to act as infinite mobile storage devices. If you barter with a follower, you can give them any amount of items you wish regardless of weight, and they will take them from you gladly. You would, however, have to barter for these back with items of equal value. Not a great system. The trick is you can steal from companions at no penalty and a guaranteed success rate. So you barter with them and the game doesn't check the weight of the items, then you steal what you need back from them, allowing you to keep well under your encumbrance if you choose. However, weight is clearly still supposed to be a factor for them, as you can't put items onto the follower using the steal command if they are already over capacity. So you have another clunky mechanic within the game where you barter to give and steal to take. For equipment, you cannot change the armor of those that follow you, but you can provide them with weapons, healing items, and ammunition that they will expend. If a follower runs out of ammo and doesn't have an alternative, they aren't going to be of much use to you, and different characters have different weapons that they are more inclined to be useful with. Tycho, for example, who we meet later, has a shotgun but is great with a sniper rifle. While you can't give anyone orders in combat, you can ask them to use their best weaponry and decide how closely they should be around you ahead of time. Many quests within this game can simply be ignored. Many tasks you consider a quest may not be listed as such in the game. The two main things we can help Shady Sands with are the Rad Scorpions and Raiders. If we agree to help with the Rad Scorpions, one of the guards, Seth, will take us to a cave where the infestation takes place. I personally use this as an opportunity to level up via combat with the help of Ian, but you could also choose to blow up the entrance to the cave using explosives if you have them. Timed explosives are really funny in this game, as you can set the timer to whatever you want and they'll start counting down as soon as you exit your inventory, meaning you can easily blow yourself up if not careful. Fallout tries to balance out these quest options in terms of experience, but they are rarely equal from what I have seen. The game will calculate the surviving Rad Scorpions if you blow up the entrance and give you experience points for each remaining, but you seem to get more just for killing them all, or rather killing them before the cave-in. If you want to optimize experience games, you need to know beforehand what the rewards are for each option, but that's better for a second playthrough and far from necessary. Each dead scorpion provides a tail. You can bring these tails back to the doctor in Shady Sands and he will make an antidote for you. You can bring these tails back to the doctor in Shady Sands and he'll make an antidote for you, although this does pass time, and time is money at the moment. If you explore the back of the doctor's office, you can find a sick man and give him an antidote to cure him. This provides an experience reward, but it isn't an outright quest, as an example of what I was mentioning earlier. So there's all these little things, both related to quests and not, that are treated as feats to be randomly found and completed as you explore, and reward you for doing such. The Rad Scorpions also give us our first example of time passing affecting things around us. Rather, by completing this quest for Shady Sands, if we spend 2 days away from the town, Aradesh's daughter will be kidnapped. Tandy was taken away by raiders, specifically the Khans, and we are asked to rescue her. She's another talking head character and one that becomes important within the lore and setting of Fallout as a whole. But at the moment she's just the child of Aradesh and is being held hostage to punish Shady Sands for refusing the demands of the raiders. You can learn about the Jackals, the Vipers, and the Khans. However, only the Khans make an appearance in Fallout 1, and it was them that kidnapped Tandy. If you travel to their encampment, there's a few ways you can go about saving her. Alternatively, you can ask to join the Khans, as they are not openly hostile upon visiting them. Realistically, there's no reason to do this outside of role-playing, as it just locks you out of saving the prisoners and Tandy. Oddly enough, there's a chance of the raiders being convinced you are the leader's father, and you can use this to try and talk Tandy free. But it's already a chance based on whether or not they think this, and you need a high luck state to do so. The typical way to free Tandy is to either kill everyone, sneak her out, or barter for her. I believe you can also agree to a one-on-one fight against Garl, but this isn't really something advisable for my build as I focus heavily on range. These are the types of choices you'll usually receive for quests like this. Talk or bribe your way to success, or use force or stealth. The sneak skill is particularly annoying in Fallout though, and it's once again due to a lack of information. It's based on a calculation. You can get closer to a target based on the direction they are facing and then compare their perception to your sneak skill. You have to actively be in sneak for this to work, and whether or not you are being successful is difficult to tell unless the enemies are hostile on sight. If I get pushed into combat, I know sneaking fails, but if there isn't any combat to fall into, who knows? It makes stealth feel obtuse and not worth investing in, especially since tasks can be completed easier by other means. I love stealth options in games, but you generally have more information given to you on whether or not you are being detected nowadays. And I think some level of that is important in a game that requires stealth, or at least encourages it. It doesn't have to be a gauge or a UI element, but just some sort of initial reaction to make it clear as long as you aren't blatantly visible. However you secure Tandy, the way you deal with the raiders will affect the ending slides. If you kill them all, or most of them, you'll find that they have been decimated later. I actually lockpicked Tandy's cell and then ran out of the map before they could kill me, and then forgot to go back and kill them later, so I got another worse ending slide for them. Similarly, if you keep Aradesh, Tandy, or a combination of the two alive, this will affect the endings for Shady Sands, and there's also a mutant timer for them getting wiped out. Little things here and there will change these slides for you, more so than the grand amount of work you may put into the more modern releases. Assuming you save Tandy, you can escort her back to Shady Sands to complete the quest and be rewarded with some experience. Quests like this often have little tidbits of optional preparation as well. You can talk to the doctor to tell him you are going to save Tandy, and he'll give you some items to help out. Oftentimes there will be people willing to interact with you in relation to the quest without the game outright saying so, and it promotes you running around and seeing how the state of the area changes in between quest objective flags. Once you're finished with Shady Sands, the next natural stop is Vault 15. Something to note about the vault is that you need a rope in order to descend down an elevator shaft within it. Rope is one of many miscellaneous items in the game. Other miscellaneous items include containers for organization like bags or a backpack, as well as tools that boost a relevant skill. Using lockpicks on a door will boost your skill by 20% when attempting to unlock something. And there's two different types of lockpicks for if you are working a tumbler or electronic entryway. Similarly, stealth boys can help with sneak, and tools, as they are called, can help with repair. Several of these are general use items, while many are necessary for quests, including rope. You can't fully explore Vault 15 or even enter the Glow without it. In terms of lore and the social experiment aspects of the vaults, this concept wouldn't become an idea until development of Fallout 2, thanks to the minds of Tim and Leonard. This made the concept retroactively true for Fallout 1, but I won't be focusing on it much here and now as it wasn't established at the point of release. This means there isn't much to talk about in terms of Vault 15, unfortunately. It will later gain more development in Fallout 2, but at the moment it is just a rundown shell of its former self. Abandoned and full of little critters for us to kill. There's a spot within the vault that is caved in, and it is here where we get an alert on our Pip-Boy that the chip is nowhere to be found, and we should look elsewhere. However, I always found this easily missable, and I remember continuing to scour the vault for a fairly long time on an initial playthrough. It's essentially just a dungeon to traverse and loot, but with minimal loot to be found. One of the best items you can find here, one I consider extremely effective, would be a 10mm SMG that allows for burst fire. We received some points of interest for our time in Shady Sands. The most natural one to explore first is Junktown, as we attempt to learn more about where to find the water chip. I don't know why I'm just thinking about this now, but it's kind of funny that there are two Fallout games where we are looking for a chip of some kind. While we already have the hub on our map, we will be able to get another settlement marked for us while we are here. Junktown is a fenced-off community heavily guarded by individuals who look to keep the raider infestation out. In fact, you aren't able to enter at night unless you convince the guard to let you in, and if you fail that, I don't think you can ever reconvince him, so you are always forced to enter during the day. Junktown is the first real moral dilemma, if you want to call it that. Maybe decision with consequence is better. Killian Darkwater seems to run both the general store and the law around here, and an assassination attempt will begin after we talk to him. We can help save him, and he will ask for our help in taking down local crime lord Gizmo, who runs a casino in the northern part of town. Killian is the good, law-abiding individual who wants to use the rule of law to take down a criminal, and Gizmo is the stereotypical bad crime boss. It's pretty cut and dry. Do you help Killian or Gizmo? Good guy or bad guy? Not a lot of subtlety here, and no real gray areas to explore. However, the original ending of Junktown would have had the better end come out from helping Gizmo over Killian. Sort of a I didn't think of that moment during the end slides to show that not everything is as simple as it seems. This seemed to lead the player down the wrong path they desired, and Tim/the team didn't want that as it could feel like a cheap gotcha. If he were to go back and do it again, Tim mentioned in his GDC interview that he would add more indicators to suggest this conclusion, and I think that would have definitely led to a more interesting quest to follow. That doesn't mean there isn't interesting aspects to the quests there. Helping Gizmo lets you be an assassin, and helping Killian lets you go undercover. It's short and simple, but it's there. For example, to help Killian, you can either get Gizmo to implicate himself by conversing with him and goading him into saying something incriminating, or you can use the steal skill to plant a bug on him. This is potentially the only time a quest route is specifically designed to utilize the steal skill, another reason I find it wasted overall. If you complete this task for Killian, he will ask you to help take Gizmo out. If you refuse, it gets completed anyway, so it's better to take part, especially since you'll have so much help. This does close down the casino though, so if you want to make an infinite amount of money gambling, it's best to wait or do this at the hub instead. Alternatively, you can agree to help Gizmo and kill Killian, but this is more difficult due to aggroing the guards, and worse off for Junktown as Gizmo takes over. You can meet a character named Doc Morbid and learn he is selling body parts to someone in the hub. This will be brought up later if you gain the knowledge, although the reward is just a little bonus and hardly matters. Unfortunately, there's no real conclusion to confronting him about it. You can choose to kill him, but this might set off the guards, I'm unsure as I never bothered. At the very least, you'd think you would be able to report him to Killian or one of the guards, but this is not the case. There's a hotel where you can stay the night or week if you wish. Staying at least one night triggers a quest where one of the girls working there is being held hostage by an individual. Again, there are a few ways to solve this, such as through combat or dialogue. Dialogue is the most engaging part as it requires multiple attempts to get the man to a point where he feels he should stand down. However, this somehow ended up with him finessing me out of $200. Chump change in the grand scheme of things, but it is apparently possible to get him to leave for free. Completing this and talking to the woman after, you can get her to provide her services for free, and this seems to be without consequence, so I'm not sure why it was included outside of just letting you sleep with someone, just for the fun of it. You just can. In this hotel is a gang known as the Skulls. No, not that one. And you can talk to Lars to try and take them down as well. You can talk to the guard about this quest after witnessing an altercation in the town's bar, and Lars will ask you to find evidence of their wrongdoing. The two ways of going about this are convincing one of the newer members to testify against the gang, or to feign joining them and using info you learn as proof so that Lars will be able to handle the situation. The testimony leads to the quest ending right there, but if you inform Lars about the gangs going on, it will become another firefight for you to deal with if you agree to help. A lot of bloodshed in Junktown. I mentioned this already, but you can meet another companion named Tycho here. You can recruit him by getting his help to deal with Gizmo, but he will be locked off if you choose to help the crime boss instead. Additionally, you can find Dogmeat here. An individual can inform you to stay away from Dogmeat and let you know about his previous owner Mel, who wore a leather jacket. The reference to Mad Max I mentioned earlier, as the character was played by Mel Gibson. It's a good time to point out that you can have as many companions at one time as there are to recruit. Ian, Tycho, Dogmeat, and Katya later on when we visit Boneyard. This causes problems such as getting stuck between doorways, and trying to keep them all alive can be a hassle. Still, the benefits outweigh the costs in my mind. Having 3 to 4 other bodies with you at all times can really help with some of the earlier battles you'll come across and trivialize others in the late game. It's so easy to become too powerful in this game, and I think it's a good trade-off that one aspect of that, the companions, allows them to be permanently removed through death. Junkyard is a great settlement because it shows us that, similar to Shady Sands, society isn't completely lost through the destruction wrought by humanity. People still try to do the right thing, to keep order, and to help one another. Aradesh is willing to lend a helping hand wherever he can, and Killian is focused on cleaning the streets. However, the concept of war never changing remains present even now. Shady Sands and Junktown are targets of raider attacks due to those individuals wanting what the settlements have and believing they can take it by force. Human greed is still plentiful. Even within these settlements, crimes can develop and be abundant, either through greed or necessity. Everyone wants something, and some individuals are always willing to step on others to get it. Many may just be pushed to the point where they are simply trying to survive or to belong. Anti-authority, a sense of self, freedom. People need and seek many things, both physically and emotionally, that all complement or conflict with one another. While conflict can be rife within the wasteland, while war may never change, there will always be those trying to build up from what humanity tore down. The constant battle is trying to stop this destruction from happening. Leaving Junktown, our next stop will be the hub, and this is where we really can get direction towards finding the chip. It's the largest settlement yet, potentially the biggest central location, and offers both quests as well as a means to pass the time while making income through helping out the caravans. Several caravan companies have a base of operations in the hub. The most recognizable to you is probably the Crimson Caravan Company, as they would also make an appearance in New Vegas. The concept of caravans is prevalent within California and is a means for supplies to be traded throughout the wasteland. You can join these trips as a guard on specific days of the month and use it as a means of traveling somewhat safely to several other locations. I never really utilized this due to it passing too much time for the money involved, but it is there and you can make use of it if you wish. However, the wasteland will always be a dangerous place and you can still run into trouble along the way, especially with Crimson Caravan, who self-admittedly take the more dangerous routes for the thrill of it. This is quite possibly the best way to feel involved within the typical day-to-day of civilization within the wasteland. It's an honest job you can optionally take part in if you see fit, and feels more official than the mercenary quest work you take on when you find it. I wish the game had more role-playing aspects like this within, but it's stifled by the fact that you remember your timer. It ends up feeling like a waste of time more so than anything else. Oddly enough, the time that actually passes while on these trips is separate from the countdown for the water chip. While novel, the caravans are hardly worth it outside of a role-playing aspect, and traveling on your own is generally more rewarding thanks to the encounters. Additionally, there's plenty more to do in the hub itself, as well as our first foray with a Deathclaw, so let's take a look at all of that now. The first thing I'm going to point out is the water merchants. These are a group of individuals who focus on shipping water specifically to various locations that need it. Who do you think needs water at the moment? That's right, Vault 13. While no one really leaves the vault and 13 is somewhat hidden, they aren't against accepting aid to survive, and we can pay the water merchants to begin shipping water to the vault in order to elongate the amount of time we have. Specifically, we can pay them a range of 2,000 to 500 caps depending on some skills, and you will gain in the process 100 extra days on your timer, which is huge, exceptionally so. The 150 days is already lenient, an extra 100 trivializes this timer completely. Originally, this was supposed to have the adverse effect of speeding up the mutant army timer by 100 days from 500 to 400, but since this was removed in a patch, there is no downside at all, meaning no consequence, which goes against the ethos of the game and is an unfortunate side effect of changing a core mechanic of the game like this based on player feedback. It feels like a bit of an oversight. If you are going to change something crucial like the secondary timer, the aspects of the game surrounding that timer, mainly just the merchants, should be updated in some way to continue having a downside. However, we need to remember how Tim looks back on these timers as negative aspects in the game's design. In the end, especially looking at it years later, this is technically a positive end to the solution. In the grand scheme of things, with development finished as it was at the time, including something brand new would be more difficult than removing a timer, but it would have been appreciated nonetheless. In a perfect world, there are no timers, but while they are there, I'd like the consequences surrounding them to stay intact. Despite it potentially being a good idea to remove the timers, not everyone seemed to feel this way. I've been having a hard time finding the exact quote, but I believe it was in the Origins of Fallout by Scott Campbell, where he talks about how the time increase was too lenient and detracted from the impact of an already lenient restriction, which I agree with. Other features of the hub include a loan shark of all things. You can take 200 caps to start, and every time you pay back the loan, the amount he is willing to lend increases by 200 up to a maximum of 1,000. You can pay the loan back within a 10-day period before Lorenzo will demand the funds, and each day accrues a 10% interest. Hey, if you want to be in debt in your role-playing game, why not? It's your world to explore and do what you want. If you don't want to pay it back, well, like Junktown, we can find another casino here known as the Maltese Falcon, a reference to the book and films of the same name that I am watching right now, believe it or not, like right now, right at this moment. There we can meet Kane and convince him to let us talk to Decker, another crime boss that multiple people will warn us about when asking about what there is to do in the hub. This can lead into a couple of quests where you complete hits for the man, and is one way to naturally familiarize yourself with the children of the cathedral. However, I skipped doing these in this playthrough as we are mostly allying ourselves with the good, lawful individuals that the game offers, and that will mean taking Decker down. If we meet with the man and accept the hit, we can head to the sheriff and report on what Decker is asking us to do. This is enough reason for the sheriff to attack the crime boss, and we can once again join to take part in the ensuing chaos. It really just feels like Junktown again, which perplexed me slightly, although Decker's quests are more involved than Gizmo's. One of the hits, if you go down that route, is a member of a religious group in the Wasteland known as the Children of the Cathedral. Recognizable by their purple robes, but not always wearing them, the children spread themselves throughout the Wasteland by offering help to those in need, all in the name of unity. Certain people feel suspicious of the group at the moment, and you can feel that there is more to them than meets the eye. Their fervent beliefs seem to lead to incensed hostility when challenged, and we can learn later why that is. For now, this is more just an introduction to the group, and you can meet Jane, the target, while exploring the hub. One of the most important reasons you would come to the hub is to gain direction and insight into the location of a possible water chip. There is a library where you can buy a holodisc describing vault locations, and one of these is Vault 12, located in Bakersfield, now known as Necropolis. The description discusses how protected the vault is, as well as its state-of-the-art water purification system, suggesting it may be the best location to find what we are after. Additionally, only Vault 12, 13, and 15 are listed in the holodisc, meaning it's our only real option at the moment. There's other ways to be directed to Necropolis, which is where we will find the chip, but the holodisc is the most straightforward suggestion in the game. One funny quest has us joining a thieves guild of all things. We can find a trap-filled hallway in a random basement. If we make it through alive, we pass the first test, and the guild will ask us to perform a heist for them. The main mission of the circle is to stick it to the merchants, who Loxley, the leader, sees as draining the town and the people living within it. Wanting to rid the hub of the greed that inherently presides within it, the group attempts to even the playing field by stealing and harassing the merchants whenever possible. For us, we need to take a necklace from Darren Hightower, who lives in the Heights, another section of the hub. A well-off man and merchant, he is the target of both Decker and the Circle of Thieves. Since we didn't kill him, we can use this as an opportunity to visit the Heights anyway and steal what we've been tasked to obtain. This is the only real quest in the game that is centrally about stealing and stealth. In fact, the best way to go about it is to show up at night, as Hightower will be in his bedroom and away from the safe housing the necklace. Time does affect the schedules and positions of characters at least somewhat, even if it isn't as elaborate as how Campbell originally wanted it to be. In fact, this entire section of town is off limits at night, and you'll get a warning informing you of this from one of the guards, so you have to bypass them throughout the entire map, as the thieves don't want you killing anyone. If you manage to do this, reach the safe, steal the necklace in return, they'll make you a member of the guild, although it doesn't go any further than that, unfortunately. You do get an electronic lockpick as a reward, however, and this is great for doors a typical lockpick won't be able to deal with. I find lockpicks in general to be pretty useless though, as raising the skill, especially if tagged, is not an investment that would break your character build by any means. Another task has us saving a farm from some raiders, but the biggest quest we can take part in involves some missing caravans, specifically those of the Fargo traders. Many are quick to point fingers at one another over who may be at fault, but it isn't solely the FGT who are being targeted, they just seem to experience the worst of it. This quest requires a lot more investigation than you may be used to, and will be our introduction to a Deathclaw, as it has also been rumored to be the culprit. Butch Harris, the owner of Fargo, points us towards the merchant Beth to find out more about what is going on. Beth will then also tell us about the rumored Deathclaw, before pointing us towards a mutant resident of the hub in Old Town named Harold, who is the only one to have claimed to see the beast and survived. If you've played Fallout 3 or seen my video on the subject, you'd know Harold is a recurring character within the series and has appeared in the first 3 mainline games. We meet him first in the hub, then again in Fallout 2, and finally once more in Fallout 3, where he has become a giant living tree mutant stuck in the ground and was worshipped by the tree minders, whom he held some contempt for due to them treating him as some sort of god. This is long before that though, and Harold is simply a mutant living in the hub at the moment, who can give us more details about the Deathclaw before another resident, Slappy, brings us to the cave. I think that name's so silly. Before that, let's discuss Harold a bit more. There's not much development with the character himself within Fallout 1, however he does divulge some important lore about the main antagonist of the game, the Master, aka Richard Grey. Harold here has been around since the Great War and remembers walking out of the vault sometime after it opened. As a traitor, Harold and his guards were constantly accosted by mutants that seemed to be spreading throughout the wasteland. He mentions them mostly coming from the northwest, which is where the Mariposa military base is located. A man named Richard Grey led an expedition to the military base. A doctor, Richard was an intelligent man that found the source of the mutants, but unfortunately lost a lot of men in the process as they tried to breach the base and were attacked by robotic sentries. Eventually just down to Harold and Grey, a robotic crane crashed into the 2 men, knocking Richard into a vat of some unknown acidic-looking liquid, and Harold passing out. Harold woke up in the wasteland and began mutating for reasons unclear, and he has been in the hub ever since. Harold doesn't know what happened to Richard after the events of the base, but he did survive, mutating as well and slowly transforming into a being that we will meet much later at the end of the game. The mutants that we run into and the events that transpire all connect to Richard Grey in some way, and we will learn more about that in a bit. In the meantime, we have a Deathclaw to hunt. Slappy will teleport us there, and we can find a small cave system that ends with a Deathclaw we can attack or be attacked by. Deathclaws are some of the more extremely dangerous creatures within the wasteland. From Fallout 1 to now, they are near legendary creatures that strike fear into communities who don't believe they even truly exist. Fallout 4 really dropped this mystique and danger by pitting us against a Deathclaw near the beginning of the game, who was just a pushover to show off the new power armor mechanics the game was introducing, and I find the reputation of the creature hasn't really recovered since, and will most likely end up flanderized as a result. Honestly, New Vegas probably did it best. Just given how the open world works, you can run into a Deathclaw just by taking the wrong path through the Mojave, and will often be mauled to death by several at once. Terrifying experience the first time it happens to you. It's less impactful in Fallout 1 due to the nature of the game being a turn-based CRPG, but the buildup is there if you talk to enough people, and it is still a somewhat challenging fight. While they have over 200 HP, a character like ours with 3 companions can take care of it with ease. A much more challenging endeavor for someone who has a fresher character for sure. Killing it was easy enough on this playthrough, and once it's dead, you can find a mutant who drops a holodisc and mentions the master before dying to his wounds from the Deathclaw. We can learn from the holodisc that it wasn't the Deathclaw that was attacking these caravans, but the mutants as they were kidnapping individuals. Scouts for the mutants were getting picked off by the Deathclaw who was hunting them. Why are the mutants kidnapping people? We'll learn a bit more about it later on. We can bring this information back to Fargo, although they won't believe such a tall tale about super mutants and Deathclaws. Luckily, we have proof with the holodisc and can warn them about the mutants kidnapping people, completing the quest and earning our rewards. There's so much to do in the hub and so many people to interact with. Broken up into several small locations, we can find shops all over, unique characters like Harold, and all the quests described so far. It really feels like one of the most grand areas in the Wasteland, and I could see players spending a lot of time here as they try to see all there is to see and do all there is to do, even missing out on some if they can't find characters like the thieves. It's through the hub that we can find a central base of operations for many of the Wasteland's inhabitants, and how we can secure resources for our vault, as well as our next clue as to where to find the water chip. So let's head to Necropolis next. Necropolis is most likely the first time you'll run into the ghouls. While not all ghouls on the surface are feral, most that we run into are. However, they only seem to attack us if we get too close to them, and I mean like really close. There's no penalty for killing these ferals, so it's great for farming a little experience, but also takes more time than I usually have patience for. There's not a ton of civilization on the surface of the area. Rather, we will be traveling from map to map by using a sewer system, and this is where we can run into the core ghoul community. Meeting the leader of the ghouls, we can ask about the water chip and learn that they need it currently due to their pumps no longer working. If we take the chip without fixing the pumps, the ghouls would be without a water source and die out because, currently in the lore, ghouls need water to live. Additionally, someone is rumored to have taken control of the watershed at the moment. We also learn about Set, a ghoul supremacist who is more front-facing when it comes to trade, allowing him to become a sort of leader within Necropolis, although only to those who work for him. Many of the ghouls don't like Set, and he only keeps them around due to the necessity of their manpower should Necropolis ever be attacked. Despite working with people, Set hates normies or smooth skins, and will be quick to temper if you don't handle yourself well when talking to him. Set knows of some super mutants in the watershed and will hire us to take care of them, which we can agree to. These mutants are there to watch Set, who is forced to work for the Master, and collect humans to be sent to the mutants for reasons currently unknown. Hating this setup, Set uses us to regain control of Necropolis. The dude is so rude to us for no reason and tells us to get lost after paying, so I generally use that as an opportunity to clean out the supremacists from the Hall of the Dead, which they use as a base of operations. It's a ton of enemies, but they are relatively weak, so it's great. Things don't need to go down like that though. The mutants can be left alone, and they will eventually slaughter everyone in the hall for us. Additionally, Harry here can take us to the Lieutenant, one of the right hands of the Master, who is stationed at Mariposa. This leads to a situation we will be skipping in this playthrough, but I will bring it up. Since the base can be destroyed before meeting Harry, you can have some unique dialogue surrounding that as well, but I didn't go about this route. Personally, I fixed the pump for the ghouls. There's no real moral dilemma if you have the ability to do so, it's just the best course of action for everyone. If you don't manage to fix the pump, as it requires some junk you find in the sewers or at the hub, and a repair skill check that can be repeated, things get a little more gray. It's pretty hard to not be able to fix the pump. You need to critically fail to lose the junk item necessary to repair it, and there's 2 junk items to find in the game. The idea that that's going to happen is pretty small. Assuming the worst happens and you can no longer fix it, you then need to decide if you are willing to doom a civilization of people to death, at least as the game presents it. Technically, you can bypass this by completing the game before the timer runs out and therefore never steal the chip, but that's a bit more gamey and meta-driven. Fallout only checks to see if you blew up the military base in the Cathedral. It doesn't actually care about the water chip unless the time limit runs out before you complete those 2 goals. You could never repair the pump, never take the chip, and still complete the game just fine if you chose to, so there are consequences for taking the chip without repairing the pump, but the chance of this ever happening is slim at best, basically only there if you want to hurt the ghouls and want to see those consequences. The chip is found in the ruins of Vault 12, which was a failed vault that irradiated many of the inhabitants. Funny considering how secure they said it would be. This would later be explained in the Fallout Bible as being due to an experiment to see how radiation would affect the residents, thus forcing the door to not close properly. So regardless of how you do it, we can assume that you get your hands on the water chip. Now you can bring it back to Vault 13, right? The game finished. We saved the vault. Well, not quite, right? That was pretty obvious, right? Bringing the chip back to the Overseer, he will ask us to file a report of our journey and what it's like out in the wastes. Unfortunately, he's not happy with the current situation. The mutant population has grown to a number higher than should be expected naturally. Someone is creating a mutant army, and the Overseer wants us to destroy the lab as it puts the vault's safety at risk. It's a weird quest for sure. I mean, okay, we were sent out to the wasteland to find the chip, but now he wants us to find the base of operations of a mutant army so that we can put an end to it? That's a bit much for one person. This is Act 2 of Fallout 1. We are past the water chip arc, and now we must continue our journey and investigate in the wasteland to learn more about the mutants and how we can stop them. If you've already been to the military base due to being escorted there by Harry and Necropolis, you may have already dealt with one objective. If not, we'll learn a bit more about it as we go, thanks to our next location pointing us there. It's time to check out one of the most prolific factions in the wasteland, the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood of Steel has the most lore potential in Fallout 1 despite us not doing a ton with them here. You can find your way here thanks to a singer in Junktown, or a caravaner named Matt, or a merchant named Jacob in the hub. Some caravans you work for even travel there, as the Brotherhood are much more willing to make deals with non-Brotherhood members of the wasteland at the moment. Despite the willingness to trade, they kept to themselves and worked as a secret order of tech salvagers, trying not to take part in the issues surrounding the wasteland civilizations unless it affected them personally. I'm not going to go into all of the lore surrounding the Brotherhood. I've talked about them time and time again in other videos. What's important to understand is how seriously they take the preservation of technology and the old world to the point of almost religious fervor. However, there are holodiscs that talk about their creation that I want to discuss, and this will help showcase how they have changed throughout the years through time and chapters within the United States, and we'll find some of those shortly. To keep others out, especially those looking to join, the Brotherhood will send Wastelanders out on a suicide mission of sorts that should guarantee they won't return. This mission involves visiting an ancient ruin of immense danger due to the levels of radiation present within. I'm of course talking about the Glow, potentially one of the most dangerous areas in Fallout at the time, but not to be confused with the glowing sea near Boston that was present in Fallout 4. Originally a West Tech research facility, the location was used to research a cure for the new plague, a disease from 2050. Unfortunately, a cure would never be found, but it did lead to the development of the pan-immunity variant to combat Chinese biochemical weaponry. This was due to the facility being taken control of by the military. This project would branch off into the development of the FEV, or Forced Evolutionary Virus, and would be moved to Mariposa military base. The FEV has an important role throughout Fallout as a series, and is a tool used in the creation of the mutants at the hands of the Master. The facility, once we reach it, is nothing other than a crater, and is the core location where we directly have to worry about radiation. Once we are in the map of the Glow proper, you will begin accruing rads at an extraordinary rate, but we haven't really talked about what that means for the player. Radiation works in tiers and increases from 0 to 1000 points. Each tier within those points further damages your special stats until cured, and should one of those stats reach 0 due to this, the player's character will die. Should the player accrue 1000 rads without dying, they have 24 hours to fix the issue or they'll die anyway. Radiation can be removed through Radaway or visiting a doctor. Unfortunately, the Pip-Boy doesn't track radiation, so you need to acquire a miscellaneous item known as a Geiger counter somewhere within the wasteland of the first game, making the Glow one of the only locations in the game that requires severe preparation to survive if you don't know what you are doing. In reality, it isn't that bad. Players can pop Rad-X as soon as they enter the map or slightly before it to give them near immunity to radiation. It only takes 2 pills to be 100% resistance to the stuff, and they last for 24 in-game hours, more than enough time to see everything there is to see within the facility. However, there are subtle traps within that you need to keep in mind. Items like skill books or using certain skills can pass the in-game time. Read enough while in the facility and you could find yourself accruing radiation again and potentially trap yourself within. It would thus be possible to soft lock your entire experience if you haven't been properly saving the game using multiple save files if you don't know how to traverse a location ahead of time, making it an incredibly dangerous location and a scary one at that. The idea of visiting the Glow can feel daunting at first, but just like everything else in the original Fallout, once you understand the mechanics at just a basic level, it's nothing but a pushover and no real issue. This is another example of the game rewarding players for talking to everybody possible and learning about the wasteland before entering dangerous territory. NPCs may inform you of the effects of radiation, how to keep track of your rad count, and how to cure it, allowing you to have that information ahead of time, or you could consider the Glow a learning experience. Taking time to be part of the wasteland and to actively learn rewards you in many ways. Plus, it's a short game. Botching a playthrough this way would suck, but wouldn't be the end of the world. You could quickly get back to where you were supposed to be, or try another route/exploration path if you so desired. Still, these invisible dangers are enough to make the Glow feel like one of the scariest places in the game and actively intimidate you from visiting it. That won't deter us though, and we'll make our way inside using rope to traverse down the crater. The Glow is a multi-level dungeon to explore, one with most of its power shut off, meaning that the robots within are not currently running. This is lucky for us as we can destroy them without repercussions or retaliation, and still get the experience for doing so. To get through the various areas, we need to find several passkeys that we can use on color-coded elevators to head deeper into the facility. However, this isn't necessary for the quest with the Brotherhood of Steel, and you could just head down and immediately find the deceased paladin to complete your task and head back. On the body, we can find an ancient Brotherhood holodisc. On the disc, we can learn that this paladin traveled here to learn more about the Glow and find technology. This was around the time of Captain Maxon, who created the Brotherhood. While trying to find what technology they could, the group of paladins, including Sergeant D. Allen, would get ripped to pieces by the security systems in place as soon as they hit the 3rd level. Allen seemed to die after his armor became inoperable. The main reason you would want to further explore the facility is for all the experience and loot there is to find. The most interactive element of this facility, though, is Zax, an autonomous intelligence that can inform us about what the facility was used for, as well as a means of disabling the robots in the facility once the power is back on. However, we can learn more about the FEV, but also power armor, as it was Westtech who created the various models at the time, including the T-45 and T-51B. Through logs, you can learn that a man named Major Barnett ordered the experiments of the Pan-Immunity Virion to be renamed to FEV due to him believing it would lead to the next step of human evolution. These experiments started with flatworms to mice, rabbits, raccoons, dogs, and chimpanzees. Generally, growth was seen in many of these species, but complications arose with increased aggression in the subjects. The testing would be moved by the Major to Mariposa to be tested on various human volunteers, I say with intense air quotes. You learn from a diary of Captain Maxon at the Mariposa base that there was a mutiny due to the soldiers finding out what the scientists were doing to military prisoners against their will. This led to Captain Maxon taking charge before the bombs fell, and then leading his group to Lost Hills, where the Brotherhood is currently stationed. You can learn more about the FEV by talking to some of the children of the Cathedral later, but the Master uses a specific strain known as FEV2 to create the super mutants. Unfortunately for the Master, this terrain will cause some unforeseen problems that we can learn about and use later. You can learn more about these experiments by finding holodiscs within the Glow. The Alpha experiment disc talks about the Pan-Immunity Variant project, while the Delta experiment seems to focus on laser weaponry. There's an FEV experiment disc, as well as FEV research that can be downloaded from Zax, but we have already gone over it. With the Ancient Brotherhood holodisc in hand, we can return to the bunker and we will be welcomed in as an initiate. There are 4 levels to explore here and plenty to do, so let's start from the top and work our way down. You can meet Rhombus here, the head of the Paladins, and learn from him that they are not currently training initiates for combat due to the threat of the mutants. It would take too much time and resources to train someone from the ground up, so they are focusing on those who have already learned. However, we can learn combat from Thomas nearby, although I couldn't get this to trigger. This was after rescuing an initiate for Talus here. The initiate was being held prisoner in the hub, and this is one of the ways you can acquire power armor, as you can ask for it as a reward. There's also a storeroom you could loot, although this turns the Brotherhood against you, and it's pretty tough. Level 2 is important because this is where we can finally get those surgeries I mentioned earlier. Each of these surgeries provides a bonus to one of your specials. You can only get each once, and they cover strength, perception, endurance, intelligence, and agility. They take 1 to 3 weeks to complete per surgery, as well as cost thousands of caps. Charisma can be increased through a random encounter, and luck increased by visiting a fortune teller in Arditum within Boneyard. I highly recommend checking your time limit or delivering the water chip before completing these to make sure you don't get yourself a game over. Level 3 is one of the most important levels of the game in terms of the end confrontation with the Master. Specifically, we can head-to-head scribe Vree about an autopsy she completed on a dead supermutant. Vree notes that overdosing on the virus seems to have mutated the individual in ways that would be considered optimal. Large muscles and bone structure, as well as combinations of recessive genes that wouldn't be detrimental. Despite this, there are downsides, including sterility and a decrease in intellect, at least in this specific case. This is important as it means that it would be possible to outlive the mutants, at least this is hypothesized by Vree. Since they can't reproduce, if you could stop them from capturing more test subjects, they would eventually die out. This is evidence. You don't need to keep it on you, but you should at least read it so it's on your Pip-Boy. It isn't clear to the player yet, but this is a crucial piece of the puzzle when it comes to stopping the Master via dialogue as easy as possible. And you may never know this if you didn't talk to Vree beforehand. Another reason to do your due diligence and explore all the game has to offer. In the same area, Sophia can give us a holodisc that talks about the Exodus, or when Maxon led his people to the bunker. It was a dangerous journey as individuals wouldn't be able to pick off the Paladins themselves, but more easily kill their family members from a distance. If you read Maxon's diary right before the events, you can understand the level of stress and guilt he was under for executing all of the scientists despite their crimes. He was a man that wanted the best for his men and tried to keep them safe. This has now led to him being glorified to the point of being considered a near deity known as the Great Deliverer. The bunker in turn became a temple where worship would take place. The disc ends talking about the team that decided to go to the Glow despite Max's warnings of its danger. You can help a knight by the name of Kyle repair some armor by getting a systolic motivator, either by convincing the quartermaster to get you one or by stealing it from Rhombus. Either way, this doesn't even secure you the armor as you then need to repair it yourself with a skill check, although it isn't difficult to do so. Finally, level 4 houses the Elders, including High Elder John Maxon, a descendant of Captain Roger Maxon. Maxon wants to search for the mutant army in the mountains, but the other Elders aren't willing to act until they are sure what the threat is. The internal politics of the Brotherhood are already being showcased to us. Their careful nature, often to their detriment, paralyzes them from action time and time again. Maxon wants to do something against the potential mutant threat, but the other Elders want way more evidence before taking any precautionary action. Luckily, we can find a military base to the northwest, either by exploring or having it marked on our map through an assortment of means. All we need to do is find and enter it, see the mutant threat, and report back. Doing so will have Maxon call a meeting with the Elders, and they will agree to send some Paladins to help clear out the surface level of the base, but only at the surface level, making this entire process effectively useless in my eyes. Before we hit the final 2 locations of the game, we still have the ruins of Los Angeles to explore. Boneyard is made up of several locations within the rundown city. When you first arrive, you'll find yourself in Aditum, the main settlement of the area. The name Boneyard comes from the skeletons of all the buildings surrounding you as you enter. Aditum seems like an alright place for the most part. Similar to other settlements, they have a form of law enforcement, this time under the Regulators, not to be confused with the faction of the same name in Fallout 3. However, there's more to this than meets the eye. John Zimmerman, the mayor of the town, can inform us that the local gang, the Blades, tortured, murdered, and impaled his son, leading him to seeking revenge. He'll also let you know that the Regulators help keep the town safe by capturing gang members when they attempt to attack the settlements, although no one seems to see this happen. A very convenient state of affairs for the Regulators, which you can actually point out in dialogue. Before we look into that issue, there are a few things that we can take care of immediately here that are important for upgrading your character. For one, there is a fortune teller you can talk to. If you get your fortune told enough, it eventually defaults to him drawing the Fool from his tarot. This event increases your luck by 1 point, and you can exploit this to get 2 points instead, but I'm not getting into it. That's something you gotta look up. You gotta cheat. More important is the hydroponic farms that need to be repaired. Talking to the chemist here, Miles, he will point us to a Deathclaw nest within a warehouse further into the city ruins. Here you will run into several Deathclaws as you may expect, so this can be a fairly dangerous area for the unprepared. However, by this point, I'm rocking power armor and a plasma rifle, so nothing's really a challenge anymore except keeping the team alive. You can find the necessary parts on a corpse outside of the warehouse, but if you go further in and kill the mother Deathclaw and her eggs, you can put the threat down for good. If you don't, the Deathclaws can respawn indefinitely. Fully removing the threat is important for a quest with the Gunrunners coming up. By fixing the farm, you can be rewarded in 2 major ways. First, by going to buy some books for the chemist back at the hub, he will upgrade a set of power armor for you by covering it in a concoction that turns it into hardened power armor, the best gear in the game. Similarly, you can talk to the local blacksmith and he will upgrade a plasma rifle by making it turbocharged, again considered one of the best pieces of equipment you can receive. With these 2 items in hand, you aren't invincible, sure, but you might as well be. Barely anything will be a problem for you at this point in the game moving forward. Zimmerman wants us to deal with the gang issue, so we might as well go do that now. Originally, the Blades weren't going to be the only gang in Boneyard. During development, the Rippers also existed, but they were cut before release. Another change has to do with the swapping of roles between the Blades and the Regulators. By approaching Razor, the leader of the gang that Zimmerman wants us to take out, we can open a dialogue and explain why we have just shown up. Razor will explain that the Regulators are playing the civilians of the settlement. Jason, the mayor's son, wasn't killed by the Blades. He left the settlement to be with Razor and was threatened to never come back by the Regulators. While trying to sneak into the settlement one night, he was apprehended by the Regulators and murdered as a means of framing the Blades. As proof, Razor provides a holodisc of Regulator transmissions where it's shown they captured the boy. The leader of the Regulators, Caleb, orders Jason to be killed as messy as possible. We can bring this information to the mayor, but he's under watchful guard at all times. If we make it known the Regulators are controlling him, they'll kill him and attempt to take the town over by force. This is a resolution, but not a great one. Instead, you can try to make a plan with Razor, but she will request weapons and equipment before attempting an assault on the settlement to remove the Regulators. We can get these weapons from the Gunrunners, however, the Deathclaw nest is between us and them, so if you haven't dealt with that yet, you're going to now. Permanently taking care of the nest is a task that the Gunrunners owe you a favor for. One of the things you can ask for is for them to supply the Blades, which is what I recommend. This is also the shop for powerful weaponry. Specifically, they seem to sell the most ammunition for plasma rifles, which was great for my playthrough. Jesse Heinig on Twitter mentioned that the idea of townies inside and gangs outside was seen by Leonard Boyarsky as overdone. The team then decided to flip the script on its head, explaining why the Regulators are secretly the bad guys in this scenario, and I think this is perfect considering we already have the more conventional law enforcement storyline found within Junktown and the Hub. Why repeat it a third time in Artitum when we could instead have a nice change of pace? Like with most altercations between 2 factions, you can agree or decline to join. Agreeing leads into one of the biggest fights in the game, the War for Artitum. Regardless of how you went about things, Zimmerman will still be attacked by the Regulators as soon as hostilities begin. You might be able to save him, but I've never bothered to try. This battle is great for both quantifiable experience for your character, but also the experience it provided to you, the player. You will rarely, if ever, see a battle of this scale within the original Fallout, aside from maybe when you storm the Hall of the Dead, if that's something you choose to do. You have so much backup for it that it's more a show of what the game can do rather than an actual test of skill, and I imagine many players were in awe at the sheer scale of this at the time. I actually had to do it a few times because dog meat kept dying on me, so it was really ingrained in my mind. But still, I enjoyed it, and there's nothing really like it in the original game. Even the civilians start fighting back, it's awesome. Finally, you can head to the Followers of the Apocalypse found in the library to the west. Our final companion, Katya, is here, and she is the only person I could find that would actually mark the cathedral on my map, which can be useful. Despite being part of Los Angeles, the cathedral is not within the Boneyard map with everything else, and is instead its own section you need to find on the overworld map. There's a mutant named Talius we can meet, and we will learn that he was another vault dweller from Vault 13 of all places, making him the third known individual to leave the vault, including us. I wouldn't call him a ghoul due to his change happening specifically due to FEV exposure. Talius also left the vault due to complications with the water supply before finding Necropolis. Talius seems to know about the Master and the plan to turn pure humans into super mutants, as something similar was done to him, although he's not sure what, as he was unconscious. He also knows the children of the cathedral are working alongside the mutants and can inform us of such. Honestly, he's a wealth of information. He'll even talk to you about the Overseer, what the Vault was like a bit in the past, more about the mutant armies, etc. He's even tied to a quest involving cathedral spies that you can start but not finish due to it being cut. He'll even ask you to take care of the remaining mutants at the watershed in Necropolis, but we did that already and he rewarded us with a flamer. Really cool dude who you could easily miss on your travels. You can also talk with the leader of the Followers, who goes into detail about her suspicions of the children of the cathedral. People that interact with the cathedral seem to often disappear, as if the hospitals they set up are just a guise to lure in unsuspecting individuals. Additionally, both Talius and Nicole have seen Nightkin, a subtype of super mutants, with cathedral members and leaving their base of operations. There's a quest with the Followers of the Apocalypse where you can ask for help dealing with the location, and they can help you a bit later on. The Followers really are the brightest hope we get to see for the Wasteland. In a world of combat and suffering, all they want to do is show humanity that war doesn't have to be the answer. To bring peace. They are the true values that the cathedral preaches, and through that, the Followers are able to see past the cathedral's lies and know something is wrong with them. With all locations explored, quests completed, mostly, and the end of the game in front of us, I like to head over to the military base as our first stop in defeating the Master's plan for unification. Again, this is an area you can be brought to fairly early on if you know how. The mutants at Necropolis will bring you to meet with the Lieutenant, one of the main mutants in charge of the Master's army. Here we can learn a lot about their motivations. You have two real options with the Lieutenant at this moment, to either give him the location of Vault 13 or refuse. Refusal leads to him beating on you until you comply, basically just punching some HP off of you multiple times. I don't think this can kill you, and once it's happened enough, he'll throw you in a cell that you can escape from. Escaping from here can be a real hassle due to all of your equipment being taken, but for some reason they don't loot your companion, so it doesn't have to be that bad. However, as intended, it seems rather torturous. I recommend not going along this route unless you want to side with the Master, although this just leads to an immediate game over, where you're dipped in a vat of FEV, and a long cutscene of everyone getting brutalized in your vault. Kinda odd how you just watch them kill everyone considering they seem to need them for the army, but I sure do love watching the Overseer get his ass kicked. It's great for learning a bit more, however. If you agree to tell the Lieutenant what he wants to know, he'll allow you to ask some questions and figure out why this is happening. Lou explains that we are within the Great Procreator. He specifically talks about ensuring unity through the creation of the Master Race, a race of super mutants that will work together to ensure peace within the Wasteland. But that already seems flawed, doesn't it? I've seen people argue about this online, but many don't seem to agree that this holds allusions to Nazism and supremacy. This is due to the Master's claims of unity and peace, but he's only willing to do that through removing what he considers lesser than, not even allowing remaining normals to breed if kept alive, as we will learn later. Despite his apparent reasoning for it, these super mutants were built with supremacy in mind. And while some lack intelligence, memories of their past, and are deeply impressionable, it seems ludicrous to believe that none of the mutants would develop wills and wants of their own, thus fragmenting this idea of unity and peace that the Master so desires. In no way does his plan ever sound like it would work in the long run, even with his psychic potential that may allow him to control a number of mutants. Should the mutants have the ability to breed, they don't, unknown to the Master, there would theoretically be so many that they would splinter off and we would be right back at square one. It's really odd listening to the lieutenant talk about how these prime individuals will become greater through evolution while chastising our human mind for not being smart enough to understand. The lieutenant is an exception. Most super mutants are noticeably less intelligent after their transformation. So to compare himself and his race of mutants to normal humans and look down on our intellect of all things shows both ignorance and hubris within his personality. Large character flaws that help signify that he is being manipulated or is looking to manipulate. The lieutenant thinks his race of super mutants are better than because he believes himself better than, but we have seen already that super mutants are tougher, sure, but really just bodies to throw at problems that you are attempting to solve by force. Intelligence seems to be tied to how pure the individual is before being changed, a prime normal. The lower the exposure to rads, the better the evolutionary process will be, leading to potentially smarter individuals like the lieutenant. It's why they want Vault 13. Many of the mutants at the Cathedral seem intelligent enough to have conversations, while others, like at the military base, are less so. So assuming mutants could breed, what happens to the dumb mutants once all is said and done? Are they forced to not procreate, similar to the remaining normals? Are they killed? What happens to them? If super mutants are the master race, are these dumber variants also the master race, or would they be considered a black mark and gotten rid of? War never changes whether you are human or not. It seems clear that unity is deeply flawed and peace is not something that could be forced upon the world, but that doesn't stop the master from trying. It's not humans necessarily that breed war, it's anything with, intelligence, desire, wants, and goals. War never changes because of these aspects that make up what we consider humanity to be, and even when we try to change what humanity is physically, it doesn't stop the slogan of the game from being true. We can assume as much as we don't get to see what would happen with the mutants should the Master succeed, at least not far into the future. However, we do get to see what happens to super mutants after the Master's defeat, and lo and behold, they integrate into human society, make their own societies, and generally do what humans do. Nothing would have changed for the Master, and his plan would have been a failure with or without us. This is a great insight into the Lieutenant, the Master, and their wants and goals, and I recommend having this conversation for yourself to get the most out of it. But if you weren't brought to the Lieutenant right away, if you were instead to assault the base, things may play out differently. And this is how I chose to go about this playthrough since we went through the trouble of helping the Brotherhood of Steel. The military base is possibly the most frustrating location in the game. It's not that it's particularly frustrating in itself, but it is more so than anything else we have run into, especially when wanting to keep companions alive. Most companions can be sent away and picked up again later, but this isn't true for Dogmeat from what I can tell. And while other characters can be somewhat guided in how they should act in battle, this again isn't true for our pet dog over here. Add on to this that there are several triggers that determine if the base gets put into alert status, and you are going to be making this assault much more difficult on yourself depending on how you go about things. However, since we are so powerful at this point, and I imagine you are as well even on your first run, doing this solo is a breeze, and not caring about the lives of your companions makes it even more so. You're about to beat the game. What's one pack meal to an energy barrier that's about to zap them out of existence? There's also just mechanics you may have never thought of, like using a radio to convince the mutants outside to walk away. In what world would you ever realize that was a thing? I needed to be told this while looking up mechanics online. Why does Fallout have some of the most niche little mechanics in the game in places you may never expect? I'm not complaining, mind you, I love little things like that, and the fact that we know about them today is crazy to me. If you remember what we did at the Brotherhood, you won't be surprised to see 3 paladins accompanying us. These dudes are pretty useless at this point, especially with a full party of companions, but the main reason is that they don't follow us into the base. So we go through all of the trouble just to kill like 3 super mutants with them, and then the Brotherhood doesn't matter anymore. One of the ways the alert state of the base can be activated is by taking too long in battle here. I didn't know about the radio at the time, so I just went in guns blazing. Taking a bit too long, I walked in to find the base's security online. On another attempt, I managed to be quicker and get inside before anyone in the interior noticed. Little things like that make the military base the more malleable and interactive of all the dungeons we have been in thus far, with the amount of combat ahead, and the ability to bypass a large chunk of it with stealth and subterfuge if you desire. The base has two main forms of security outside of combat, in the form of multicolored force fields. Yellow force fields can't be traversed through without disabling first, but the red ones can, at the cost of taking damage when passing by them. This is where complications with the companions come into play. The pathfinding in Fallout is bonkers, at least for followers. Considering how abruptly they were added to the game, it isn't surprising. We already know that they have no care for your own safety, but what you might not know is that they don't care about themselves either. Each companion is willing to run through that red force field to follow you every time. This means that you have to try and shepherd them through these and make sure they don't backtrack. This is especially annoying with Dogmeat, who doesn't have that much HP, and even more so in combat when you can't control where they go. Say you have two force fields, one yellow and one red. You unlock the yellow, pass through, and start combat. Maybe Ian makes it through with you or something. However, as combat goes on, the yellow reactivates and the rest of the party hasn't made it through yet. Well, don't worry, they will all begin pathing through the red field regardless of if it will kill them or not. So you can see how the game layers multiple mechanics on top of one another here for a sort of final boss dungeon, or so it feels like. You need to be able to get through these fields by disabling them or taking damage, maybe not activating them at all by making it to near the end of the base without triggering security, a feat you get rewarded for with experience. Or maybe you got here by talking to the mutants in Necropolis. Maybe you have cathedral robes and no companions and can talk your way to the lieutenant through here. Did you fight the mutants outside or trick them into leaving? There's way more choice here than you may be used to, despite Fallout having all these little niche decisions you can make throughout the game. This feels like a culmination of everything possible, and while it can be frustrating, it's more impressive than anything else. Getting through the base this way takes a lot of work, but there's plenty of experience for you to earn along the way. Once we make it back to the floor with the lieutenant, you can see there's a command room of sorts full of cathedral members. Once inside, there's a terminal we can access that seems to house gibberish due to the selections being encrypted. You can use your science skill or a security card you find to decrypt it and see what options you have. These are timers for a self-destruct sequence that will allow you to blow up the base and the vats full of FEV along with it. There's an encryption decoder disk on the lieutenant if you kill him, but I don't think it actually does anything. However, there's also a holodisk style entry on the terminal we can download, and I recommend picking it up before the timer. The log in question is Richard Gray's audio diary, the same Richard Gray that made it to the military base alongside Harold. Within it, we learn that Gray escaped the vat. Richard managed to shut down the security in the facility and look into what the FEV was/is, learning it to be the source of all the mutants popping up in the wasteland. Slowly, Richard seems to heal, even becoming stronger than he was before. Although the mutations were beginning to show physically with his skin bubbling, his body became instinctual, with mutations latching onto living creatures and forcing them into his body to provide sustenance. Additionally, Gray began developing psychic abilities, which he believed to be crazed delusions at first when he feels the mind of one of the mutated creatures he consumed. Gray began to believe his mind was not only clear, but better, as if he could understand and answer every philosophical question ever made. It was around this point that he began considering experimenting on other creatures to see if they would also gain intelligence. The idea of unity is formed in his mind when he fuses a rat and dog together by dipping them into the vat of FEV. This becomes his main focus and goal moving forward. On top of psychic abilities, Gray was also able to interface with computers and download their knowledge straight into his brain, allowing him to learn more about the forced evolutionary virus. Eventually, some humans show up, and sure enough, we get an answer to a question I posited earlier. The Master, as we will refer to Richard solely moving forward, was disgusted and disappointed with the creation of super mutants that didn't come from prime normals. It considered them too dumb to keep around and only used them to fuel itself by consuming them. These beings, this new master race it was attempting to create, still had individuals it considered lesser than, to the point that it would rather them be food than people. However, one individual with low radiation damage was mutated and assimilated into the Master, creating the hive mind persona we will meet shortly. It was after this initial assimilation that the Master began referring to itself as we, and Richard seemingly disappeared from existence. With an army underway, the Master wished to expand its store of knowledge in a permanent location where it would continue to grow but remain stationary. This would become a location hidden underneath the cathedral. It's amazing how much we can learn about the Master ahead of time by just exploring the world. You may not even realize this was the final confrontation we were hurtling towards right away. Many don't refer to the Master as that outright. He has been known as a dark god or holy flame as well throughout. It's just another example of how much you can get out of the game just by looking for it. You can set the timers to like 1 minute or 30 seconds, but these run in real time and aren't really enough to get out without getting yourself killed. The real option you want to pick, adding to the randomness or the reward for decrypting the terminal, is the 300-second option, which is more than enough to escape even with combat happening along the way. One of these options gives you the 300-second timer, but also puts the base on alert status if it isn't already, and another just puts the base into alert status without a self-destruct, so it's just an annoying option you might choose if you can't see what everything does. Getting out of here for me was a real pain because Dogmeat was on his last legs. I had to trap him in a room between 2 yellow force fields and then escape. The game doesn't care if a companion is close to you or not, they'll still travel out of the map with you regardless. Once you escape from the base, you'll be treated to an FMV of the location exploding. This leaves one final location for us to stop by in the game, the Cathedral. Much like the military base, there are several ways to go about this final location, but the main idea is, how do we reach the Master? Even by this point, you may not think the Master is some real being that we need to meet with, but there's plenty of evidence to suggest this confrontation, the main one being the journal in my opinion. The learning about Unity and how the Master left the military base for a new location where it would continue to grow. Using the guise of this religious group, the Master has managed to spirit away individuals throughout the wasteland and bring them into the cult of Unity. Throughout our entire journey, individuals have pointed out how odd the children of the Cathedral are and how dangerous they seem, and when we walk in, the first thing we see is a scene reminiscent of the 1984 Apple Macintosh ad from the Super Bowl. If you remember what Nicole said, we can get help from some followers here so we can get further into the Cathedral. But I didn't go this route. I didn't really go a stealthy route either, as I like to have my companions with me to the end, and there are parts where you will get shot on sight regardless of if you are wearing robes or not. You can find Laura on the first floor, who seems to be the most normal of the bunch. Everyone else is either a religious zealot or the equivalent of a raider/mercenary. The reason for this normality is her being a spy for the followers of the Apocalypse, and the one we can talk to, like Nicole mentioned. That being said, there are ways to at least get through the first hurdle without combat, such as talking to Laura and asking her to unlock the door for you, stealing her badge, or asking the nearby Lasher to give you one so you can meet Morpheus, the leader of the cult. Alternatively, you can just lockpick the door, which is how I do it, as no one seems to get upset over it. From there you have 2 options. If you have no companions with you and are wearing cathedral robes, I think this is a requirement, you can get to the top of the cathedral tower and meet with Morpheus. If you talk to him and offer information about the vault, he can be convinced to take you straight to the Master, bypassing the whole dungeon we were about to explore. So that is an option, and the only real reason to talk to Morpheus in my mind, because he's so difficult to have a conversation with. The main thing you can notice is the relationship between Morpheus and the Master, or at least how he perceives it. It seems obvious that the Master is using the cult for his own gains and will most likely throw them away once he's finished with them, something Morpheus doesn't seem aware of. Despite calling him the Master, if you point out that he is Morpheus's boss, he will call themselves partners. A bit diluted if you ask me, but it is a doomsday cult after all. I feel like that's what comes with the package. Delusion is par for the course. At present, Morpheus seems to describe the Order as a roaming hospital of love and peace, even to other members of the cult as we can pretend to be. This is mostly due to us being a new low-ranking member, but it's funny considering you still run into Nightkin along the way to meeting Morpheus, and I don't know, I'd have some serious curiosity surrounding that. However, he has reasoning for it, and it's that they just showed up one day. They just showed up one day, and they were incredibly loyal for, like, no reason. I personally prefer to find the Master the long way around, as it gives us more to do and explore, although I was getting kinda tired of playing Fallout at this point. Instead of taking the stairs, you can unlock another door that leads to the basement. Unfortunately, this causes the NPCs to turn hostile, but they can't follow you into the basement, so I just rush in there once the doors open. I wouldn't blame you for not even knowing about this. I found it incredibly difficult to see due to how it's placed in the cathedral. Once inside, there's a lever that opens a secret entrance to the prototype vault that was used by Vault Tech to show off what a vault could look like. This is where the Master migrated to after the events of Mariposa. Now, just to quickly mention it, back at the military base, if you searched through all of the lockers, you probably found a nuke key that we can use at the cathedral. At the very bottom of the vault is a nuke we can set off using a timer and finish the game without ever seeing the master. A cool option, but no real fun in it since the master is one of the best parts of the ending. If you take the time to explore the vault, you can find a group of human experiments known as psychers. The master, now having psychic potential, wanted to bestow it on others as part of the evolutionary process, and this led to some test subjects we can meet along the way. It's important you talk to them if not brought directly to the master, as they offer you a psychic nullifier that will prevent you from taking psychic damage as you walk through the final hallway. It's funny, a lot of people get surprised to learn that Fallout has supernatural elements, but this has always been the case. They are usually limited to some degree in order to prevent them from feeling commonplace, but they are always there. The nullifier is super important because not only do you and your party take damage, you will suffer stat losses to your intelligence and perception as well. However, assuming you make it through, you'll be face to face with the master and enter into the most abrupt dialogue in the game.
So what shall it be? Do you join the Unity, or do you die here?
Join.
Die!
Join.
Die!
In all of Fallout as a series, never has there been a character as unnerving as the Master. The voice delivery, the design, everything leaves you near speechless as you try to understand what is happening and what you are looking at. If I had to compare it to anything at the time, I think I would compare it to Am from the video game version of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. A very unnerving character. Very great voice acting, too. Insane. This is Richard Gray, or it was until it assimilated with other minds and computers to become something new entirely. The best way I like to go about this conversation is by having the autopsy report on hand and asking the master to prove himself to us in order to convince us to join the Unity. One of the first descriptions he uses again is the master race. We are once again shown not just the parallels, but the direct connection between the master's values and Nazi ideology. The other known origin of the term comes from the history of slavery in the United States, and comparing these two origins, I believe there are clear connections here as well. He's called the master for crying out loud. It's a fairly on-the-nose comparison of the master-slave relationship of the time when slavery was prominent in the United States. Add onto that the genocide of normals to create this master race, and we can see the writing on the wall. The master is a supremacist through and through. He doesn't even care that much about the intelligent mutants, let alone the dumb ones. And we can learn he is planning on turning as much of humanity into mutants as possible, while allowing the remaining normals to live, but never breed, wiping them out in the process. The Master wants one race, one goal. It believes that differences are what drive humanity to war and destruction, and so he wants to remove that concept entirely, despite mutants having their own sense of identity. There's already holes in his logic here, and he seems unwilling to see that. Well, he's as arrogant as they come, and that is one of his biggest weaknesses, believing his plan to be so foolproof he never considered the case that these mutations prevented the super mutants from breeding. We have already learned that they are all sterile, so all of this work and time the Master has put into this Unity was for nothing. I know having the autopsy report makes this easier to explain to him, but I don't believe it's fully necessary. I think a high speech and careful selection of what you say should be able to convince him. This bigot, a term you can even refer to him as, is nothing but a flawed, proud individual. So proud it is blind to its own ignorance and failings, unable to see it has doomed so many in the wasteland because of this mistake. The best way to make him realize this is to bring up the autopsy report and have him ask the mutants themselves. He does, but they are too scared to tell him anything that may anger him. You can further push him to check on the female mutants, and he'll realize that what we are saying is true. The super mutants are doomed to extinction without the ability to make more mutants. This causes the Master to lose it. It seems to come to its senses partially, realizing all it has done for unity and peace was just madness in disguise. Rather than looking for another means of creating the unity it desires, the Master gives up entirely and sets the base to self-destruct. After all the work and hurt and struggle, this one setback is enough to make the Master give up. And while that is good for us, it just shows how pathetic this creature or any supremacist really is. You show them proof of their flawed arguments and they have nothing to say. They hunker down and plug their ears or they crumble away. These aren't powerful people, they are people that want to feel powerful. They roleplay power. When you show them that they are not, they become nothing, and this is what we see with the Master. A weak individual that wanted to be great and wanted to exert force on others despite being weak, feeble, and a mess of a man, just like the rest of them. You can choose to fight if you want, but I think this is the best way of going about it because it is an exploration of why the Master is flawed. The fight is rather involved with multiple super mutants appearing to aid the Master, as well as him having various weapons at his disposal. That doesn't mean it's difficult at this point by any means, but it is what feels like a real boss fight, really the only one in the game. However, regardless of how you go about things, the Master will be defeated, either through stealth with the nuke, dialogue, or by sheer force, just as the developers wanted. The core options of the game are there for you right up to the very end. As we escape, another FMV plays and shows the cathedral being destroyed. With all sources of the mutants and their leadership defeated, the game is over and sends us back to Vault 13 one last time. But before that, we get the ending slides to show what happens based on our actions. First, we see that our actions have neutralized the mutants entirely and their armies all flee to the east. The ghouls in Necropolis managed to survive thanks to us fixing the water pump for them, but they could have been wiped out if we had allowed enough time to pass and entered again. The mutants would have decimated the ghouls, which is the canon ending despite not being the good one. That's reality though. The Followers of the Apocalypse ending is bugged. In the true ending, based on you helping them complete a cut quest, they grow into the influential group we get to see in Fallout New Vegas. However, due to the missing content, we only get a slide explaining that they are wiped out by the mutants. Oddly enough, nothing else is said about Boneyard for some reason, so who knows what happened with everybody else. Shady Sands has several endings based on if Aradesh, Tondi, or a combination of the two are still alive. If they both live, they form the New California Republic, which we see more of in Fallout 2 in New Vegas. Junktown will be better or worse off depending on who you sided with. There's also a mutant timer here as well. Having worked for the Brotherhood, they helped drive out the rest of the mutant forces and even shared their hoarded technology. This is changed if you kill the head paladin, as the group will evolve into a fascist state known as the Steel Plague. For the hub, guess what? Cut content prevents you from getting the good ending, again, and the town gets wiped out. Despite this, the good ending where the hub is prosperous is still considered canon. Finally, how you deal with the cons will determine their ending. I actually forgot to go back and wipe them out in my playthrough, so I got an ending where they kept being trouble for everyone around them. In terms of canon, they get disbanded, but this seems inaccurate to what we see in New Vegas. Once the endings are completed, we arrive outside Vault 13. Here, the Overseer congratulates us on our actions, but provides us with some bad news. We are a taint on the vault. Due to all the excitement and experience we have seen out in the wasteland, bringing that back into the vault could inspire others to leave and explore as well. No people means no vault, and the Overseer is always looking to keep people within the vault, potentially against their own will. We saved them, but we could destroy them, and he isn't willing to take that chance. You have a small opportunity here, to either kill the Overseer or leave peacefully. I choose to kill him usually, because it feels good, although this doesn't seem to be what happens moving forward. Dude has an insane death animation, by the way. It's so long. It's so brutal. Regardless of what option you choose here, you are exiled from the vault. It's a bit disappointing. People think of Fallout as this dark, almost hopeless experience, but time and time again on our journey, it shows you that that isn't the case. Hope is more alive than ever. Settlements rebuild, people try to help others, and the world is slowly but surely getting back on track. Whether that will lead to destruction again is up in the air, but there is hope and there is light. It's a scary world, but over the course of this adventure, Fallout has managed to show us the positivity of humanity as well as its failings. That's why the ending is so disappointing for me. I don't need the Vault Dweller to have a happy ending per se, but there should have been that hint of hope that was sprinkled into everything else. A great way I would have loved to see, and I understand there wasn't time for this, is to have your companions alongside you in the ending. If they were with you up to this point, seeing that camaraderie would have been special. Sure, Fallout is meant to feel like isolation, but despite what it means to feel, it doesn't deliver on that for me. Instead, I see a character who found a place in the wasteland, a dog, friends, maybe a home somewhere out there. The ending feels sad, but knowing what we have accomplished, what is waiting for us out there, it feels freeing. It feels like this is the best the Vault Dweller could ask for. Could you really stay trapped in a vault after all you have seen in the wasteland? All that danger, sure, but all that freedom as well? I couldn't. I doubt the Vault Dweller could either. Fallout is a rather short experience if you know what you're doing, but despite the cut content, it still manages to feel very dense. Aspects of the storyline can feel abrupt and patched together sometimes, but it all flows in a way where there is a noticeable path for you to follow if you are looking for it. The game is designed to give you the clues and tools you need to explore all there is to explore while still naturally making your way to the end, and that is a great experience. The amount of choice offered to you as the player, the amount of options you have for getting through various situations, must have felt so liberating and revolutionary at the time of its release. What can feel daunting to get into is more welcoming than you may think, and despite what people say, it's not as dark and miserable as some like to portray it. There's humor, there's action, there's rebuilding, and hope. It's a wonderful experience that shows how war got us where we are currently, but that we can rebuild from the ashes. Despite this, it still takes destruction to stop destruction. We stopped the Master, but killed countless people in the process to do it. It was the right thing to do, but a lot was lost because of us. Even using speech and talking it out, we couldn't prevent this violence from happening. Is violence an inevitability of humanity? Does war actually never change, or does the game attempt to challenge this notion? I believe that a lot changes, but war may always be an inevitability. So many people, so many wants and desires often lead to competition, to pushback, to desire and violence, eventually war. There's no one person who can go out there and stop these altercations before they happen. War is just an aspect of humanity, a blight that may never be cured. But despite that, I don't think all hope is lost. Far from it. As groups like the Followers grow larger, stronger, maybe they will have the ability to help settle things peacefully. If enough people try, and there are people trying, maybe we can cure this aspect of humanity for good. I was surprised to see this idea pop up more than I expected in an original Fallout experience. People act as if the game is just so miserable, in a good way. No hope, no help, no future, just war and violence. I didn't see it like that, and I was really happy about that fact. Fallout was a wonderful experience to revisit. The depth of the mechanics and choices, despite many skills feeling useless, must have been so impressive at the time of release. Despite the violence, the isolation, and the danger, the game managed to be something that I saw a lot of positivity in, and I like that about games like this. I like to see the potential growth out of near hopeless situations. I like that Fallout is a game about growth, survival, and peace, as much as it is about death, destruction, and war. If you enjoy these videos, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. Let me know what themes you took out of the original Fallout. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hey, thanks so much for watching the video. This is the Patreon section where I shout out all of the patrons. Sorry this video took so long. I was working on a Mass Effect video, but it didn't really work out. So I lost like 2 months of work there, I think. And if you want to support the channel, you can find the link to the Patreon in the description. Shout out to Alberio, Gim Best YouTuber 69, Dylan Delaney, Critical Link, Gloomerous, Backdraft 677, Natsuki Mamamura, Brendan Hesse, Metalhead Frank, Wooly, Ralkar, Ashtray, Cyberworm, Jonathan, Strangely, Ludhifumi, Rosaleo, and Mr. Janky. Also, if you're ever wondering about the thumbnails and stuff like that, the artist is in the description as well, so feel free to check them out. And big shout outs to them for doing all my retrospective thumbnails all the time. Check them out. Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you in the next video.